Good morning and welcome to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Zach Horner. It's 6:59 on the East Coast, 3:59 in the morning over on the West Coast. We do appreciate all of you joining us as we take you through all the big stories of the day from all around the country and around the world as well. Let's start by taking a few live looks outside. That's New York City right there, looking towards the Empire State Building. Pretty close to that neck of the woods. Also, New York City, that's outside of the Fox Corporation studios there. A beautiful shot there in the Manhattan neck of the woods as we switch gears to the U.S. Capitol. A beautiful sunrise there in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Big news on the debt ceiling. We'll get right into that. So there will be a vote today happening. That'll be happening at 2 p.m. The House will begin to vote on the debt ceiling deal. We'll see where all that goes. But also some other news happening. Family announces Rosalynn Carter has dementia. Jimmy Carter does remain in hospice care, something we've been monitoring for about the past month or so here. Waiting for any developments on that. But the latest out of the Carter family is that Rosalynn Carter does have dementia. We'll have some reports on that and news as the day goes on. And also Atlantic hurricane season begins tomorrow, June 1st. We'll have plenty on that today. I do want to get into an event that was happening this morning, as we do also prioritize live international events here. The European Parliament press conference on breaches of the rule of law and fundamental rights in Hungary. They're freezing Hungary's funds in the EU. Let's take a listen.
Time where we do that for 6 months, I just want to raise two problematics, and that's why I think that the Council we need the Council to do more. Is the first thing is that we cannot decide next Parliament. I want to raise that. I mean, people will enter into office on the 1st of July as MEPs exactly at the same time as this presidency starts. So we are asking newcomers, I mean, most of people will be back, I guess, but a number of newcomers, and we're asking a new parliament, maybe with a new president. You don't know. I mean, we are asking all of these people to immediately, in 1 week, take the decision to boycott. So we can only do recommendation, we can say this parliament what we think should be done, but, you know, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, once again, all of this will not have an effect on, I mean, I think that some of Sophie's ideas are very, very good, and specifically the one putting on the podium other people of Hungary and not only the government, but that will not change the fact that the parliament will not be managed to prevent the Hungarian government to take certain stands publicly. If they go on an official mission, it won't be able to prevent some missions. It won't be able to prevent if they invite someone that we don't agree with. I mean, all of this, the power of the parliament, if it was to exercise it, and I'm very sorry because most of the time it doesn't. I mean, we are probably some of the MEPs that would like sometimes this parliament to be more powerful, but they doesn't always exercise completely its power. But even if it was, it has a limited stretch. The last question I really did not understand, because I think that a number of examples was given that specifically it's what the tone that you set for presidency and what you say. We all know that has an importance. Some presidency wants to give a social color to their presidency. Some presidency want to give fundamental rights color to their presidency. Some will be very high-tech. I mean, what you put on the agenda, what press conference you organize, who you go to meet, who you invite, has a signification and brings something in the public debate. So, yeah, that is very damageable if Hungarian government decides to use this as to serve their own narrative, as Thijs said. And anyway, and I will finish on this, I mean, once again, we have this Article 7 procedure. It's in the treaty. What does it mean when a country has been declining since 12 years? First resolution of this parliament, I always recall, is from 2011. 2011, this parliament was already flagging, we have a concern, a huge concern, not a little one. 12 years of declining and 5 years under Article 7 procedure. And you just can have your presidency like that, like any other government, any other member states. You have the same privilege, you have the same rights. I mean, how does this function? Shouldn't we be questioning this. I even think that if there were one day changes in treaties, we should think about the fact that after a certain time doing how long can you stay in Article 7 procedure? 15 years, 20 years, and nothing happens? How is this logical? How is European Union defending itself in that sort of case?
All right. I think a couple of members have something to add, or maybe...
Maybe to add to Gwendolyn, if I may, on the question on the Janša government. I disagree. I vividly remember, for example, just an example, the communique after the fall of Kabul, which was clearly inspired by a toxic, very bad narrative, because the Council is holding the pen. The Council is holding the pen when starting with these communiques. And also, the Janša government only just started, very much inspired by his good friend Orban. So I would say, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because this government, and Orban in particular, clearly expressed that he wants to push his agenda, that he wants to use this presidency. So I think that the comparison with the Janša government, that fortunately also gives us the example of a country that can change for the better. But I think he was only just starting, and I think this is clearly a point where I think the Council does not understand the seriousness of what is ahead of us.
Yes, again, we move ourselves and we respect the treaty. So there are prerogatives for the European Parliament, there are others for the Council. So I again want to reiterate that we ask the Council to act. And Gwendolyn said it in the beginning. She was looking what are the margins in which they can act. What does the treaty allow or not allow? I did the same. I'm convinced that Article 7 allows the Council to suspend the country of certain rights deriving from the applications of the treaties, when that country fails systematically and over time to respect the fundamental values of the European Union, enshrined in the Article 2. So this gives the Council, not us, but the Council, a large maneuver possibilities. And they should really act, because this is not something that will be easy. And in fact, it will be. We have to think about the European Union as this strong democratic institution, and what can come is not easy for the European Union. For what we give as an image to the world.
One sentence, Sophie.
Yes. Well, I think we should also look, in addition to what has already been said, at whether the failure of the Council to take any steps vis-à-vis Hungary, and specifically with regard to the presidency, because I agree with Isabel that there are definitely legal possibilities, but whether their behaviour doesn't qualify as a lack of sincere cooperation. We shouldn't only be looking at Hungary, we should also be looking at the Council, because let's not forget that the only reason that Mr. Orban has this power is because of the European Council. It's the only body that is giving him this power. Nothing else, not even his own government. It's the veto, it's the fact that they all want to remain friends because they're going to need his support for something else. It's a perverse system. And they're keeping him powerful. So they're giving him all the tools, all the weapons. So I think the European Parliament should also, become a little bit more of a political animal and enter into the fight with the European Council and the Commission as well. I mean, we're very good as a legislator, but it's about time that we start to play hardball. Because yes, we're asking them to scrap the Hungarian presidency, but maybe we should also look at consequences for the cooperation with those two bodies. As to conditions, we could ask him to become a Democrat again. Not very likely. I mean, he might as well become an astronaut or a ballet dancer. On Solution, you mentioned boycotting the trilogues. I want to be clear. I wasn't calling for a boycott of the trilogues. I'm saying the trilogues are not a formal instrument. They're an informal arrangement for negotiations in order to, not get into second reading and third reading. But we're not obliged to do it. We can just go through the procedure and do first reading, second reading, third reading if necessary. And with regard to damages, I think you've already highlighted a couple of situations. At the same time, I think we should also not overestimate it. We're talking about the rotating council presidency. It's not as if they're, it's not as if they're passing laws by decree or something like that. But it's the visibility, it's the podium that they get. So that is, I think, where we also have to. Assuming that the council is not going to have the cojones to strip him of his presidency, we should focus on how do we reduce it to the bare minimum, and where we cannot avoid giving the Hungarian presidency the podium, we'll put somebody else next to him.
Yeah, well, I think that to have a presidency that is no longer can be defined as a democracy, heading the EU work for 6 months, it's just a no-go. It should be a no-go. And I'm actually ashamed on behalf of the Commission and the Council at this press conference, repeating mechanically speaking notes. That's just not good enough. It's not good enough. And I would say to them that you use the tools at your disposal according to the treaty. You take away the Hungarian presidency now, and you have to solve this quite quickly. And then we can move forward. And there are lots of recommendations from this parliament. And we wouldn't wish anything more than democracy being reinstated and rule of law and equality, respect for fundamental rights in Hungary. We're working every day with people in Hungary on these issues. So that's our main goal. But this concerns us all. We just cannot let Hungary take that space for 6 months.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Many thanks to our MEPs for being here today. Many thanks to our interpreters for their patience. And if you need to ask further questions...
And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in to this discussion from the EU Parliament about freezing Hungary's European funds. Hungary's actually trying to get access to some of their post-pandemic recovery funds, but there's a bit of an impasse there, so that's been the focus of most of this discussion. I do want to take our first commercial break of the hour. We'll come back and talk about an update and a story out of New York City, or actually New Jersey, as a matter of fact. It was a New Jersey councilwoman. There's been an arrest made in that murder. We'll get to that here in just 2 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. A major breakthrough in the shooting death of a New Jersey councilwoman earlier this year. Officials say a 28-year-old suspect has been arrested in Virginia. We do have Fox 5 New York's Briella Tomasetti. She's live in New Jersey with the latest details for us this morning. Briella, good morning to you. What can you tell us?
Yeah, a major breakthrough for sure. Zach, good morning to you. The family of slain councilwoman Eunice Junifor had been hoping and praying for that breakthrough for the past few months. Yesterday, those prayers were finally answered. Now, there are still so many questions that remain. What was the relationship between the suspect and Eunice? Why was she targeted? What was the motive? Everybody is wondering why this innocent woman lost her life. Well, those are all things that we just don't know yet.
Rashid Ali Bynum.
He's the person investigators have been trying to pin down for the past 4 months. 28-year-old Rashid Ali Bynum of Portsmouth, Virginia, was taken into custody yesterday and charged with first-degree murder in the slaying of New Jersey councilwoman Eunice Junifor. The Virginia man was also charged with unlawful possession of a handgun.
I am so elated and overjoyed to know that all of our local, state, federal agencies were able to come together and give us some closure right now.
Junifor was fatally shot while sitting in her SUV outside the Sayreville townhouse where she lived on the evening of February 1st. The case had gone unsolved since then. Prosecutors compiled a long trail of evidence, including surveillance video linking Bynum and a white Hyundai to the crime scene.
Surveillance video was recovered capturing the suspect fleeing from the scene in the direction of Ernston Road. Additionally, a witness at the scene described the suspect as a thin black male, possibly 5'10" to 6 feet tall in height, having ear-length braids or dreads. Another witness described a suspiciously parked white Hyundai observed in the surrounding area minutes before the murder.
In the days leading up to Junifor's murder, Bynum allegedly searched online to see what firearm magazines were compatible with a specific handgun. Investigators also say his cell phone was detected going through toll booths at the same time as the white Hyundai. From Virginia to New Jersey and then back again on the day of the shooting. And one more connection.
They knew each other from the church. Now, whether or not there was some church-related business that was behind this is not clear to say.
Prosecutors allege Bynum knew Junifor from Fire Congress Fellowship, a church Junifor had been affiliated with in the past. His contact information was reportedly even saved in her phone.
Additional records reveal that on the day of the murder, Bynum searched the internet for information on Champion Royal Assembly Church, as well as the area in Sayreville, New Jersey.
Yeah, prosecutors also say a handgun was recovered from the address Bynum returned in Virginia after the murder. Now, what exactly happens next? Extradition from Virginia to New Jersey. That could take a bit of time unless the extradition hearing is waived. After that, he will be remanded to Middlesex County Jail pending any further hearings. So certainly a complicated investigation at the very least. For now, live in Sayreville, New Jersey, Zach, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Briella Tomasetti with the latest details on this case. Some good news and a step closer to closure for that family. Briella, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It is 7:18 on the East Coast, 4:18 in the morning over on the West Coast. Let's get our second commercial break out of the way. Don't go anywhere. We'll come back with some more here on Live Now from Fox as we take a live look outside at the U.S. Capitol, where at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, a vote will begin on that debt ceiling deal. So progress being made so the U.S. does not default on its debts. We'll see where it all goes. We'll be back in just 2 minutes with more here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. This is an event that happened earlier this morning, but of course we do prioritize international events as they happen. Sometimes they start early in the morning, so we record them and play them back. Pretty interesting stuff here, though. Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo, H.E. Albin Kurtis, delivers remarks on the future of Kosovo during the Globsec Forum, seen as the Eastern European Forum of Davos. Davos, of course, is the city that hosts the World Economic Forum, so this is the Eastern European version, I suppose. Let's go ahead and bring out the audio and listen in, live, raw, and unfiltered.
Serbia, because I do not like bilateral relations, good neighborly relations, without European values. We aspire to join EU. We have applied December last year for accession formally. Also, we want to join Council of Europe. Kosovo is a success story. We had 7% of GDP as economic growth in these 2 years that I'm in the government. Tax revenues increased, for example, by 2/3. FDI doubled. And we are becoming export-oriented country. In Western Balkans, six countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Serbia, we are number one according to Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, fighting corruption, World Justice Project, rule of law, Transparency International, political freedom, liberties, and civil rights, VDEM, electoral democracy, and we are coupling democratic and economic progress. So the future of Kosovo is bright. But we have, with the force of rule of law, combat extremist, ultranationalist, right-wing groups.
But you have just portrayed a situation where Kosovo is, from your description, taking the high road. You have been recognized by the United States, recognized by the EU, recognized by everyone in the G7 as an independent state. As you said, Serbia won't recognize you. But what steps can you take to act on the 2013 agreement, the Brussels agreement, to give those ethnic Serbs in the north a feeling of autonomy? And if you always have to go through Brussels to talk to your own minority, I mean, where is this sort of independent communication? At some point, if you want to become part of Europe officially, you've got to be able to open that dialogue and deconflict this unrest in your own country.
I have to say that it's difficult to imagine from outside the lack of freedom of expression for Serbs almost everywhere they live in the Balkans. Because the viewpoint that has been installed is one state, one party, one leader, one church. The main political party is Serbian Orthodox Church. And they have the logistics, the infrastructure of bishops everywhere in every municipality and perhaps neighborhood. So we need democracy to be reinstalled.
So you're saying that every single Serb within your territory has taken an absolutist position. They don't want to be part of Kosovo, and that's it.
No, they are being bullied by Belgrade. They want to be part of Kosovo, but they cannot express freely what they want. We have a Serbian community in Kosovo, which is 4% of population, but we have 3% of other minorities, and 93% are Albanian, Roma, Ashkali, Egyptian, Gorani, Turks, and Bosniaks. But the Serbs in Kosovo, Belgrade allows only one party. For example, Bosniaks have several parties, Turks as well. We Albanians, we have dozens of political parties. Serbs have only one political party. It's not allowed. The guy who dared and made a political party, my minister Nenad Rašić, his son was severely beaten a couple of years ago. He's a very courageous man. I don't agree with him all of the time, but you know, why we should agree all of the time? You know, all of the time one doesn't agree with oneself, let alone with others. So I think it is important to be able to have diversity, heterogeneity, political pluralism. Regarding Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, 10 years ago, this has been signed in Brussels. In contrast to signing that document, President of Serbia doesn't want to sign with me this basic treaty that we have adopted and endorsed together. However, this document has some very strange formulations. Like, for example, in certain municipalities, police commander should be a Serb.
But if it's a Serb municipality and they want to be policed by Serbs, isn't that a way to reduce the tension?
You know, of course, it's very likely that in a Serb majority municipality, the police commander will be a Serb. But it's very problematic if you write it down with law-abiding validity. Because what if a Roma wants to become a police commander? Do you by default exclude? Then it takes the flavor of racism. So it is very important to acknowledge that most likely it will be from the majority of community in that municipality, but not to make it mandatory.
But it sounds like
national identity is a belonging to certain culture and language and historical consciousness. It is not a profession. Policeman is a profession. A good policeman is not only an Albanian policeman or a Serbian policeman. A good policeman is a good policeman, full stop.
I hear you, but the argument could be made that you're letting that, detail be the enemy of the overall good, if that's what it takes.
Is the principle of the structure, so that's what is at stake.
We have about 15 minutes left, so I'd like to invite questions from the audience, and if our mic runners could bring one down there. While that's happening, I'm going to take the first one from Slido, which asks, who takes care of the Albanians in Serbia? Do they also have an association, or will one be formed? Ethnic Albanians or Kosovars in Serbia?
Albanians in Serbia have National Albanian Council with very little competences. And they inhabit 3 municipalities, Preševa, Medveđa, and Bujanovac, where unfortunately Serbia is exercising a kind of bureaucratic, administrative, ethnic cleansing by passivization of addresses. Policeman comes at your door. If they see that you're not there a couple of times, then they remove you from the register. So this is done in the name of not registering as inhabitants of the diaspora, but actually they do it to all the people. When I said to President Vučić, let's have good neighborly relations with reciprocity in the rights of the minorities, he didn't want even to listen, let alone to answer.
And sadly, we don't have President Vučić here as we'd hoped. Can you introduce yourself and ask a question?
Thank you very much, Kimberly. My name is Edward Joseph.
And I do want to switch gears here for a moment and actually go to another live event that is happening right now. We'll pull that up. This is described as the Stakeholder Engagement Event at the European Union United States Trade and Technology Council. This is a meeting in northern Sweden. The chief negotiators at the meeting are U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, amongst others. Let's go ahead and bring that audio up and listen in live, raw, and unfiltered.
U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So the theme of this panel is very wide, furthering the green transition through the transatlantic marketplace. We could talk about that for hours, but I would like the discussion here today to focus on 3 different aspects. First of all, the transatlantic marketplace as a backbone of sustainable and resilient, secure and diversified supply chains. I also hope to cover clean incentives for transatlantic decarbonization efforts, and of course also an innovative and clean technology-driven transatlantic marketplace. And in order to hear as much as possible from our stakeholders' representatives, we will begin here today by brief statements from 3 TTC principals, followed by statements from each of the stakeholders. And I also hope that we will be able to spend some time on an open discussion among all the panelists. So I would like to give the floor now to European Commission Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Valdis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johan. Dear panelists, well, first of all, we are happy to be here in Luleå, which is a center of new industrial revolution for a more green and sustainable future. It's very timely that we discuss how TTC can contribute to driving the green transition forward. Both European Union and United States are committed to lead the fight against climate change, and Trade and Technology Council can make important contribution to this effort, because it's a great example of a multidisciplinary platform that builds on digital and trade expertise. So the thinking behind it's simple. If we are to maintain global leadership and prevail in standard setting in today's geopolitical climate, the EU and US cannot afford to have two separate green markets emerging on each side of the Atlantic, so we can gain much more by working together to promote a fair, competitive, innovative environment where our companies, our workers, our consumers can thrive, and also resilient environments that can withstand sudden shocks or ruptures in supply chains. The Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade aims to build long-lasting bilateral engagement for promoting more integrated and resilient transatlantic marketplace, and to use trade in accelerating green transition. By defining ambitious work program for Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade, we want to show that trade policy can make a significant and mutually reinforcing contribution to green transition both in EU and US. And actually this this work program is one of the major results that we can that we achieved in this ministerial meeting in Luleå. So it basically revolves around boosting transatlantic marketplace, taking steps to enhance the resilience of our supply chains, and strengthening our bilateral cooperation on advancing green transition globally. And this also complements our clean energy incentives dialogue, which was launched by the presidents in March, also as a way to ensure that our respective incentives and public fund are mutually reinforcing. So I will stop here. Thank you very much, and I now hand over to Catherine.
To drive urgent climate action, from presidential directives like the 2021 executive order to fight climate change to landmark legislation like the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We want our trading partners to recognize with us, by working together, that acting to protect the climate is good for our businesses, for our workers, and for our economies, not just critical for the environment. As we seek to reduce our carbon footprints and benefit our industries, we're each bound to do things that cause anxiety for the other side, whether it's on the EU side, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or from the US side, the Inflation Reduction Act. But our shared ambition to tackle climate challenges is what is important. It creates an opportunity for us to work together to tackle the existential crisis that threatens all of us and our future generations. I wanted to highlight that we are continuing our negotiations between the U.S. and the EU. And you heard Valdis talk about putting the U.S. and the EU markets together on a transatlantic basis to drive the kinds of change and that race to the top that we know that this inflection point is creating an opportunity for us to do. The global arrangement will be, when we get there, which will be this fall, right, Valdis? Yes. The world's first carbon-based sectoral arrangement to address carbon intensity and overcapacity in the steel and aluminum sector. This arrangement, I am confident, will be historic. It will help us to achieve our sustainability goals by reducing emissions, defending key industries and jobs, and spurring that race to the top, while also addressing unfair competition from non-market economies and sources of overcapacity like China, but not solely China. Together, we're demonstrating that trading partners can align on common objectives and use trade tools to decarbonize our economies and drive cleaner trade. Lastly, President Biden has instructed me to bring a new approach to trade that advances the needs of our workers, protects the environment, and creates an inclusive prosperity. I just want to highlight the fact that the EU is, once again, our premier partner in manifesting a new paradigm for doing trade, something that pursues a positive vision for our future, is focused on decarbonization, but also has the welfare and the livelihoods of our workers at the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tai. I will now give the floor to United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken.
Johan, thank you very, very much. At the risk of repetition, I think you'll hear me in violent agreement with my friends and colleagues. But the first thing I want to say is this. It is so critical to us that not only are we having this stakeholders meeting, but that everything we do is infused with the views, the perspectives, the experience of the stakeholders. It's a critical part of the TTC. One of the things I think we've learned, those of us who've been in government for some time now, including myself, is that more than ever before, if we do not have stakeholders with us on the takeoff of every big issue, they're probably not going to be there on the landing, and what we do is not going to be sustainable. So we place tremendous value on having all of you here, but not just today, every day as we're working through these challenges. And whether you traveled here in person, whether you're actually with us virtually today in some fashion, or many who are sharing their views in writing, thank you, because it's an integral part of this process that we've established. And I also want to give a special shout out to the students among us so here today. It's a cliche to say that what we're doing, what we're working on, will shape the future that you inherit. But there's another part of that, which is you need, and we're counting on you to help us do that shaping. This is not simply something that we're doing now that we're eventually going to hand off to you. It's vitally important that your voices, your views, your perspectives be included. By definition, every new generation has a new way at looking at the challenges that we're facing at any particular time, and none of us have a monopoly on ideas, never mind good ideas. So your engagement's critical, and again, it's not just thinking about the future; it's actually the present, the now, where we really want that engagement. Working together, I think we share the same objective, and that is to build a clean infrastructure and develop clean technologies for the future. This has the obvious imperative of addressing the climate challenge. It also, I think, we're convinced, has the tremendous benefit of actually building new economies for the future that are going to be, or certainly can be, powerfully beneficial to all of the constituent elements of those economies, whether it's our workforce, whether it's our companies, whether it's our societies as a whole. Now, none of this happens automatically, none of it's easy, and we know that there are huge challenges in getting from here to there. But we're equally convinced that if we are able to do this together, we actually can succeed and can do this effectively. Some of us just came from a G7 meeting a few weeks ago, where on one level the good news is that the G7 countries, if you look at them, have each made commitments that, if fulfilled, and that's a big if, would keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's the sort of good news. The less good news is the same cannot be said of the G20, and the same cannot be said if you go out even beyond the G20. So even in just making sure that we have the appropriate ambitions, again, the G7 is in a pretty good place, but we need to build out from there, and that was some of the work that we actually were doing at the G7. So we have a shared goal. We need to make sure that everyone is adapting and adopting the plans necessary to reach it, but then, of course, that's not enough. We actually have to implement them, and that's really where we know the challenge lies. But again, I think if we're able to not only have the vision necessary, but actually convince all of our constituents that we can, all of us, wind up in a better place, we can get there. The governments and private sectors have an enormous challenge in actually advancing a fair and efficient clean energy transition at a scale and pace that's needed to achieve the goals. So it is bringing this up to scale, and then, of course, it's moving quickly on it. We all know that the decisions and the actions that we take over the next 7 years, the remainder of this decade, are going to determine whether or not we're able to reach the goals that many of us have set for halfway through the century, 2050. One other thing I just wanted to emphasize, and it's something that Valdis and Catherine also touched on. When we're looking at this question of fairness, we want to ensure not only a level playing field, as vital and as important as that is, we're also working through the TTC, including, for example, via the semiconductor early warning system that we've established, through the clean energy incentives dialogue that you've heard alluded to try to build sustainable, resilient supply chains that are free, for example, from forced labor and immune from economic coercion. Those are vital aspects of the future, too. And we have strong constituencies that are insisting that we move in that direction. We also use the TTC to actually elevate environmental, social, and government standards as we build diverse, sustainable, and secure supply chains. Ultimately, what we're about, if we do things right, is creating a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And if it's a race to the top that everyone participates in, no matter where they're from, no matter which country they are, that's a good thing. And that's what we want to encourage. As you heard Valdis say as well, it's so vitally important that we coordinate together through the TTC to make sure that, for example, some of the incentives that we're putting in place to create that race to the top are properly coordinated and don't actually inadvertently create some kind of zero-sum game race to the bottom. On both sides of the Atlantic, we have now unleashed incredibly powerful incentives to try to drive innovation and complement and spur private sector investment. But we've got to do it in a way, again, that is complementary. So the incentives dialogue that we've established, that was announced by President Biden and Commission President von der Leyen back in March.
And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in live, raw, and unfiltered to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, speaking about EU-U.S. trade agreements. They're talking about a number of different topics on this. This will be going on for quite some time, but I got to switch gears, go to a break. Then we're going to go to Atlanta for the latest on the former First Lady, Rosalynn Carter. She's been diagnosed with dementia as Jimmy Carter does remain in hospice care. We'll have a report on that in just 2 minutes, right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. The Carter family announces that former First Lady Rosalynn Carter has dementia. Mrs. Carter is living at home and enjoying visits from her loved ones. The news comes months after it was revealed that former President Jimmy Carter is in hospice care, where he does remain. We do have Fox 5 Atlanta's Mark Teigner. He's live at the Carter Center with more. And Mark, what can you tell us? This is kind of shocking news as they're still dealing with the former president in hospice care.
Well, certainly thoughts and prayers going out to the Carter family. This news coming out of the Carter Center here in Atlanta. They say that the family wanted to share this information and make it public so that other families that are dealing with similar issues can make sure that they get the help that their loved ones so desperately need.
Disease of the brain.
The family of Rosalynn Carter announces the former First Lady has dementia.
Dementia is a complicated illness, especially when you combine that with advanced age.
The National Institute of Health defines dementia as the loss of cognitive functions, including thinking, remembering, and reasoning that interfere with a person's daily life.
You're going to expect things like memory loss, particularly short term, trouble with performing activities of daily living like bathing, toileting, dressing, etc.
The Carter Center didn't say what type of dementia the 95-year-old has, nor did it reveal the severity of her diagnosis. But experts say with the right care, Mrs. Carter and other dementia patients can lead fulfilling lives.
Just because someone's living with dementia doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to still reach out and be valuable and touch society in a really positive way.
The Carter family hopes sharing the former First Lady's diagnosis will encourage others to get the support they need. The announcement comes months after news came out that Mrs. Carter's husband, former President Jimmy Carter, is in hospice care.
They're having two serious illnesses, so the family has to be providing that much more support. They'll also need support from additional caregivers.
Both Carters are living together in their home in Plains, Georgia. We're told that they are happy and that they are receiving visits from their loved ones and even enjoying the Georgia springtime. Reporting live from the Carter Center here in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Mark Teigner for Live Now from Fox.
And just like you said, Mark, our prayers go out to the Carter family. Mark Teigner, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It is 7:48 on the East Coast, 4:48 over on the West Coast. Let's get our last commercial break out of the way of this hour as we take a live look outside in New York City, outside the Fox Corporation building there and the Fox Studios there in New York City. We'll be back in just a couple minutes with more here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. We have a live event happening right now. This is in northern Sweden. I believe the city is called Luleå. They're talking about EU and U.S. trade and technology issues. Some of the negotiators here at the table at this meeting, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, amongst others. Let's go ahead and bring that audio up and listen in live, raw, and unfiltered.
And systemic competition. We simply cannot afford a repeat of the digital revolution when Europe and the US went their separate ways and are still trying to sort out their difference, as I believe the TTC is well aware of. Therefore, my urgent plea, as we're on the cusp of a new technology revolution, the clean tech revolution, let's recognize that bigger markets matter. Speed to market matters. The ease and the scale of technology deployment matters. The more aligned we are, the more attractive we are as an investment destination. The more we can leverage our soft power to set the world's best standards, the more we can grow the pie together rather than bicker over how we divide a shrinking one. Concretely, I asked this body to do three things. Firstly, open up the TTC process to the clean tech community to help identify where there is scope and need to align. Secondly, infuse this body with some commercial logic and know-how. And double down on the ambition that we must once again lead the technology frontier. And finally, build a transatlantic marketplace for green goods and services. As I pointed out earlier, the marketplace for green investment is already there and it's thriving. So it's something we should and we must build on now. And I'm looking to the TTC to make this happen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anne. And we will now hear the views of Karin Lexén, President of European Environmental Bureau. Karin, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much. It's a great honor to be part of this conversation. And as said, it's my role to convey the perspective of the civil society. Maybe the notion that our planet Earth is alone from our children may be a good way to illustrate our point of departure. So we do believe that innovation, new technology and trade are important vehicles, really important vehicles for the green transition, given, as already pointed out, within the sustainable boundaries and in respecting human rights. So we believe that the TTC has a very important role to play. My first point of view would be that to establish a resilient supply chain, it is crucial to first identify the sources of demand and then implement the appropriate strategy to mitigate these demands and to make priorities. Even if more strategic raw materials will be coming into the market in the coming years, it's important that we increase the product lifetime. For this, we must go beyond merely advocating recycling and emphasizing also reuse and repair and other strategies. And this is not only saving a lot of emissions of carbon dioxide, it's also creating a lot of jobs. Second, the green transition is about decarbonization, but not only. Climate change mitigation must go hand in hand with nature protection and restoration. The World Economic Forum 2023 Global Risk Report points out that nature loss and climate change are closely interlinked, and that a failure in one sphere will cascade into the other. So even if tackling the climate change sometimes conflict with nature, it's really important that decisions on priorities must be made in a holistic and in a long-term strategy. Third, human rights and indigenous peoples' rights, including the free, prior and informed consultation, must be respected and fully integrated in all processes, not only for the sake of the communities that are directly affected by the impacts, but also since the foundation of a sustainable and safe society is respect and dignity. So being here in Sweden, I must emphasize that the rights of the Sami people must be respected and honored in the green transition. So finally, I do believe that we need now more than ever cooperation and dialogue across borders and sectors. So I very much appreciate the possibility of taking part in this conversation.
Thank you, Karin. And our fourth stakeholder representative is Samantha Smith, Strategic Advisor for Clean Energy Jobs at the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, and thanks to Secretary Blinken and the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, and to you, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, for convening us. Clean energy and climate change are huge priorities for the AFL-CIO and for the American labor movement. That's a relatively new development. And it is in large part because the IRA, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, these gigantic federal investments in our economy and in clean energy, because they have labor standards attached to them. And while you can always want more as a trade unionist, nonetheless, these investments are going to create and secure millions of good union jobs. And that is absolutely critical for us and for our members. And if we want to have prosperous and stable democracies, it's important that we are building support for them also by doing things that are good for workers and that are worker-centered. I'll just explain why. I mean, a lot of our members care very deeply about climate change and the green transition. But every single one of our members, and over 70% of American workers, cares about getting a good union job. And so building that support through good union jobs is a key part of this legislation, and that's why we are so much in favor of it. It's not just us. We're an international movement, so we talk, for example, to our European trade union sisters and brothers, our siblings, all the time. And we know that this is something that matters to them, too. Having high labor standards that are attached to government subsidies and incentives, to trade, and also to corporate practices, that matters to European workers. It matters to workers in every country where you have trade unions. So we are all fully aligned, even if sometimes our governments are not, about what we'd like to see happen in this green transition. We want every job that comes out of this green transition to turn into a good union job. Let me make two concrete proposals. So the first is that there are these huge investments by the EU and the US in the green transition. And it would be great if the EU and the US, if our countries could work together to ensure that the highest labor standards are attached to these investments. Again, creating these good union jobs that all of us want. And second, we'd also like to propose an MOU between the EU and the US to have a formal process to work on establishing what we would in the US call high road supply chains for certain green goods that are going to be critical to this transition. And just as examples, really in the EU, European countries, the US, we're spending billions of dollars or euro on solar panels and photovoltaic cells. And we need to have secure supply chains that exclude forced labor and that also are going to make sure that the people making this stuff have secure, safe jobs with rights and with all the benefits of freedom of association and freedom of expression. So those are our two proposals. Thanks very much for the opportunity to put them forward.
Thank you, Samantha. And I would now like to give the floor to Antoine Auger, Head of Program at the Green Trade Network.
Thank you very much, Minister. And yes, I come here with a double hat as a head of program for IEP, which is a think tank based in Brussels, but also as a coordinator of the Green Trade Network, which is a new initiative, a collection of experts on trade issues, discussing sustainable trade issues, and providing, and I insist on that, evidence-based solutions. So why do we try and take time from such busy people? Well, that comes from a dire conclusion from the IPCC. The idea that climate change is causing widespread impact to ecosystem, people, and infrastructure throughout the planet. And that is arguably the single most important cost that our economies will have to face in the coming decades. Yet these impacts and these costs are associated with a great degree of uncertainty as to where, how, and with how strongly they will manifest, which complicates our policy response from a risk assessment perspective. So in the face of such risk and such costs, we are convinced that trade is part of the solution. Trade is fundamentally a flux, a facilitator, an accelerator even, between an exporter benefiting from additional market opportunities and an importer that benefits from better access to potentially crucial commodities, goods, and services. And investment is the other side of that coin that provides the means to these stakeholders to actually operate. So the key question is, what do we facilitate through trade and investment? What sector? What good? What services? We should leverage that tool that we have, these tools that we have, trade and investment, to foster our mitigation effort through the decarbonization of our economies and facilitate our adaptation to a new and potentially a more challenging world. We must use trade when it supports that objective. But that also means that we should not be afraid of taking a more cautious approach to trade when it's accelerating quality fuels activities that can be detrimental to the climate as well. So proposing adequate, realistic solutions on how to do that is really at the heart of our actions. We try to find solutions that can be fostered bilaterally, like here today, but also on the multilateral stage, as Secretary of State Blinken mentioned, for the process to be more inclusive internationally, and also to promote regulations that can be ambitious regulations at home as well. So I am looking forward to today's discussion on how the EU and the US can collaborate to tackle this most important issue of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. And our last stakeholder on this panel is Mary Shorlins, Vice President Europe at the US Chamber of Commerce. Please.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. I represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the world's largest business association. We represent companies of all sizes across all sectors of the economy, ranging from large multinationals to the smallest mom-and-pop shops, as we call them, in the U.S. On Main Street. Look, I think just about everything that can be said about closer transatlantic collaboration on the green transition has been said. So I don't want to repeat too much, but I just have a couple of key points. First, as the process towards the green transition races ahead, it's imperative that our governments keep up in terms of regulatory alignment on clean energy technologies, and in terms of things like aligning efforts on how to measure, monitor, and report on emissions. A harmonized emissions measuring methodology would eliminate a significant obstacle to trade and capture varying emissions outputs of goods, and this is particularly true in the natural gas value chain. So cooperation on regulatory alignment on regulatory cooperation in the green sector is key. Likewise, cooperation on strategic minerals. This has already been mentioned, but worth underscoring. This is one of the most significant supply chain constraints we face today as we are striving towards this green transition. And it's essential that the U.S. and Europe find ways to partner together in achieving, in securing these strategic minerals and reducing our dependency on a particular actor or actors. We simply cannot achieve our climate goals if we fail to increase our production of critical minerals by an estimated 500% by 2040. And when we think about critical minerals, we need to be thinking about the entirety of the supply chain and production chain for these goods. A key element when it comes to critical minerals, relates to permitting reform. Now, we've just seen some progress on this in the U.S., and we'd like to see more progress on this in Europe as well. Lastly, and this is a bit of a bank shot, as we say, in addition to promoting transatlantic cooperation on the green transition, the U.S. and Europe also have to demonstrate leadership in multilateral fora. And so we think that it would be a critical element in promoting the green transition would be for the U.S. and Europe to lead a resumption of the WTO environmental goods agreement negotiations. While agreement on what constitutes an environmental good can be difficult to achieve, initiating conversations on supply chain resiliency, many of which are already occurring, including in the TTC, would be a very important step forward. Governments could equally consider identifying a target list of existing environmental technologies with defined impact and focus on eliminating not only tariffs but also non-tariff barriers to deployment and commercialization. An environmental goods agreement would be a small step, but an important one, not only to promote the green transition, but also, of course, to reaffirm the value of the World Trade Organization. One last point I'd like to make, and that is the inherent link between the green transition and the digital transition. These are the twin pillars driving this Commission's agenda. I would argue these same pillars are driving the American government's agenda nowadays. And it's important to remember that one cannot occur without the other. Thanks to that interconnected global economy, which is underpinned by data flows and e-commerce and the internet, we're able to seamlessly engage with one another. And through online meetings and things like that, we're all fed up with Zoom, pandemic-induced Zoom fatigue. But all of these are excellent ways to lower emissions and stay connected and boost our productivity. The digital sector is also one of the greenest parts of our economy, powered by a globally integrated cloud network, which is in turn overwhelmingly powered by solar and wind energy. Of course, all of the progress towards the green transition will be undermined if we're not able to finalize and implement a US-EU data privacy framework, or if new provisions under consideration, for example, here in Europe, require the localization of industrial data in Europe. It's important, it's critically important to get the digital and data policies right on both sides of the Atlantic in order to sustain our progress in the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, everyone. And we still have some time left now for discussion. And well, we've heard now about all of these important challenges that are ahead of us and also about the opportunities. That's also important to underline. But while we are now here in the northern parts of Sweden, in Luleå, and we're having this fantastic TTC meeting, I think the obvious question for me to ask you in the panel now is, how do you believe that this TTC meeting that we've had can really leverage the role of the transatlantic marketplace and also promote this transition that everyone is talking about, the transition to a low-carbon emissions economy? Who would like to start? Margrethe.
Well, I'd love to start because we have something really tangible. Because outside of this amazing House of Culture, there was an electrical autonomous truck with its charger. And that charger is now a transatlantic charger. And that is, literally opening the market. It is trucking in that we can do things together. Not really all about that for detail, it's just some technology. This is not a detail. Because agreement on standards is what enables trade. That opens a marketplace. And I think the fact that it was there, it was tangible, you could take it, you could plug it in, it's driving there already. I think that is proof of concept of the Trade and Technology Council. That really shows that this is working. It is delivering, it is tangible, and the promise for the future is even better. Because standardization is what we have heard all the time, and also said it, don't think about fragmentation. We cannot afford it, and with the geopolitics of this world, it will damage ourselves. So I think here what we have seen is absolutely proof of concept of the Trade and Technology Council.
Thank you, Margrethe. Would anyone else like to comment on this? Samantha?
Sure. So the TTC, has already innovated and developed this transatlantic labor dialogue, bringing together social partners from Europe and from the United States. And it can also be a place where, again, Europe and the United States align on labor standards. So a lot has been said about aligning on technical standards and on measuring and reporting emissions from different value chains. This could be a place where we align on making sure all the jobs are good. And that in turn helps to align markets, it helps to level the playing field, and it helps to keep out bad actors. So maybe that could be a unique role for the TTC.
Thank you, Samantha. Anne?
Yes, so I agree with everything that was just said. I would encourage, though, that we focus particularly on frontier technologies. There'll be a whole slew of new clean technologies that we are developing now and deploying. And it's very important that you step in at an early stage in setting standards and in regulating so that we don't have this divergence, as I mentioned, that we had with digital technologies. Please prevent that from doing because this is very costly to companies and it's also costly for governments because you're both investing massively now in these new technologies. So this is one way to accelerate the deployment and the scaling that is so urgently needed. So please, and I know this is difficult for policymakers because you oftentimes don't know what the technology frontier is, but there are many out there who can help you define what it is and better understand it. Please use this body to not only look at mature technologies, but really...
If you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in to an event happening in Luleå, Sweden. That's in northern Sweden. We've heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken and others discussing a number of different topics revolving around European Union and U.S. trade concerns. This event will be going on for a while. We might dip back into that here in a little bit, but you see those other boxes on your screen there at 2 p.m. Eastern Time today. The House in Congress there is set to vote on the debt ceiling. We'll see where that goes. Right below that, news this morning. Breaking news, Chris Christie announces his 2024 presidential run, giving it another go. We'll see how that progresses as well. Plenty of stuff to keep an eye on here on Live Now from Fox. Let's take that commercial break. We'll come back in just a couple minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. It's been nearly 1 month since that mass shooting in Allen, Texas that took the lives of 8 people and wounded several others. Now that outlet mall where the tragic scene unfolded is set to open back up for business. We do have Dan Godwin with our Fox 4 Dallas team. He's live for us this morning with the details. Obviously good news that this outlet mall is opening back up, but it really comes on the heels of that unbelievable tragedy.
Well, good morning. It is a safe bet that most every customer who visits the Allen Premium Outlets today will be thinking about what happened here on May 6th. It'll be that way for employees as well. The hours of operation listed for today and going forward, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Not every store will be open. Some are waiting until tomorrow. The owner of Allen Premium Outlets kept this large outdoor shopping center closed for more than 3 weeks until all of the funerals took place and people had time to grieve. The shooting here left 8 people dead, 7 injured. An Allen police officer shot and killed the mass murderer. Sky 4 captured images yesterday of employees preparing for today, entering what appeared to be a check-in station just outside the mall. We spoke with one store manager who told us her employees will be ready to go, but she says other businesses will not have all their personnel back.
So I know that a lot of stores are going to lose a lot of people, but there's a lot of us that are not going to be defeated by this. We have been in the community for a long time. This is home, and we're ready to get back and show everybody that we're not broken, and we'll be strong.
There will be an increase in security at the mall. Allen police officers will also be here on site. The city of Allen says it is working to create a permanent memorial to the 8 people killed on May 6th. As the mall moves back into normal operating hours, some of the 120 stores, restaurants, and shops here say they may be closing a few hours early in the beginning. Reporting live in Allen, Texas, north of Dallas, Dan Godwin, back to you.
Yeah, certainly good news that it is opening up, like I said, but again, just unbelievable tragedy there. Dan Godwin with Fox 4 Dallas, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. It is 8:17 on the East Coast, 5:17 over on the West Coast. Let's go ahead and get to our first commercial break of the hour, or second, I believe. Second. We'll go with that. Don't go anywhere, though. We've got a lot more to get into here on Live Now from Fox. Live events, a number of things happening today, and big news to get into as we take a live look outside at New York City towards the Empire State Building. A beautiful day there in the Big Apple. But big news here, actually, I'll mention it real quick. The debt ceiling is set to be voted on 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The House will start that vote. We'll keep track of it for you and bring you any updates as we do find that out as the day goes on. Like I said, let's take that break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. We're going to listen into this event here, live, raw, and unfiltered, excuse me. This is happening in Sweden, in northern Sweden. We've been hearing from U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai as they discuss EU-U.S. trade slash stakeholder engagement issues. So kind of a lot of words there, but looks like they might be ending for a second or maybe taking a break. Let's bring the audio up and listen in. And it looks like they just wrapped things up there for a moment, so we're going to switch gears and go back to another event that occurred this morning. As we do prioritize live events, we did record on this. It happened earlier in the morning, before we started actually, but we do keep an eye on all events here, including international events. So let's go to this. The Globsec Forum they're seen as the Eastern European Forum of Davos, which of course is the host of the World Economic Forum. This is the Eastern European version of that, where Kosovo's Prime Minister H.E. Albin Curtis delivering remarks. Let's take a listen.
Surrender our democratic republic. If they want peaceful protest with early elections requests, they have a prime minister who has been all his life a political activist and more than ready to listen to them and perhaps also to agree with them.
Is there any dialogue with that opposition?
Brussels is the venue where we do dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, because I do not like bilateral relations, good neighborly relations, without European values. We aspire to join EU. We have applied December last year for accession formally. Also, we want to join Council of Europe. Kosovo is a success story. We had 7% of GDP as economic growth in these 2 years that I'm in the government. Tax revenues increased, for example, by 2/3. FDI doubled. And we are becoming export-oriented country. In Western Balkans, six countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Serbia.
And as we go to this playback of this event, we actually have a live event going on right now, so we want to prioritize that and switch gears to the French President, Emmanuel Macron. He's giving a speech at the Globsec Forum. This is in Bratislava, which is seen as an Eastern European Davos, as I said before, Davos being the host of the World Economic Forum. Let's bring up that audio and listen in, live, raw, and unfiltered.
We focus on the war aspect as well, as the experience with Russia has shown. We need to think clearly, we need to have our minds clear and to be ready for the future and potential future conflicts. And the second challenge, or the second matter that I want to talk about, is that Europe should not be just following some strategic activities of the others. We need to be an active player. For example, at the NATO summit, when we cooperated with a different American administration,
l'année 2019, nous, Européens, nous avons découvert qu'un traité qui nous couvrait face à des missiles qui touchaient notre sol, le non-respect russe et la décision américaine pouvaient nous laisser...
We discussed the INF treaty, which was
de la même manière, lorsque
not discussed sufficiently, and the communication with the then American administration in this regard was more complicated. In addition, we know that Russia did not respect NATO treaties, and I want to say very, very clearly that us Europeans need to be active players, active stakeholders, and protect the treaties which protect our security as well. This is the future. We can't leave it up to the others. be it the US or Russia or anybody else, we need to be credible partners, credible players. That's why it is very important to be able to handle the armament, and here I come back to the industrial sovereignty that I mentioned before. We need to be much more active. We need to have a stronger say, for example, in the industrial production in Europe, because this also strengthens our independence. I would like to discuss this with other European partners who are interested in this topic. Furthermore, I would like to talk about air defense. The war in Ukraine has shown how important this area is. We need to find a balance of offensive action and defensive action. We must clearly focus on nuclear deterrence as well, and I promised in Munich that a conference will be organized about this subject in Paris. I would like to warmly welcome all interested partners to sit around the round table and discuss this topic with us. We need to make sure that Ukraine has stable security, that it is protected. I have heard many debates and discussions about this, but we are part of geopolitics. We help massively to Ukraine, but we don't want to involve Ukraine in strategic discussions. I know that this has been discussed before, but I think that the best way to go forward is to engage Ukrainian representatives. If we want credible and sustainable peace, if we want to be a credible partner to the Ukrainians, we need to give Ukraine sufficient means to stop further aggression. Et ce sera l'objet des discussions collectives dans les prochaines semaines d'ici au sommet de Vilnius. Of course, this needs to be discussed together with other partners, but we must be able to guarantee tangible and sustainable protection and defense of Ukraine, because Ukraine is protecting Europe today. That's a fact. That's why Ukraine is supported so much. It's part of a multilateral framework, and it's a result of many discussions that we have led. We need more ambitious strategies and activities than we had before. From the midterm perspective, we need to work on sustainable peace in Ukraine. We need to focus on our relationships with other countries. And we need to prevent escalations in the future. This is how we can achieve stability. We must not find ourselves in a situation that, for example, Russia will be so heavily armed that we will need to change the course or change our plan. We need to be active, we need to sit at the table and be able to discuss. And we need to be able to assess if we are still going in the right direction. I would like to add that 1 year ago in Strasbourg, I talked about the European policies and how to reinvent them, and how to revisit the question of political organization of Europe beyond the European Union. We don't want to be a competitor to NATO, of course, but at the same time we must make sure that NATO does not replace the enlargement of the European Union. In terms of energy, security, political strategies, we need to have a common solution, and enlargement of the EU is one of the ways forward. Tomorrow I will discuss precisely these topics in Chisinau. We will discuss among partners, and we will try to look at the topics in an innovative way. We all need to focus on solidarity to protect ourselves and to maintain security. When it comes to the EPC, it's an important part of our efforts, but again, the EPC does not substitute enlargement. I think that we need to enlarge as quickly as possible. Maybe remember that France in 2018 suggested changes to the accession procedure and the enlargement procedure. However, we see that the current procedures may not work as we have thought. I think we should avoid a few mistakes. The first mistake would be to maintain the status quo, to give hope to the Western Balkans, for example, Moldova and so on, and just to play for time. This would be a tremendous mistake, I believe. I think that this would also give space to those who want to destabilize Europe. And one day, we would wake up in the morning and the situation would suddenly be much more dramatic and negative than it is now. Another mistake that we could make is to invite other countries because we need to integrate Western Balkans and Moldova in the EU and just welcome them in the EU, but do nothing further. And that would also be a mistake because we would be weakened as Europe. We need to pay attention to the specificities of these countries that would be the new members of the EU. So the Western Balkans can join the EU, Moldova, and they will become our partners in defense, in migration, and in other areas. But then we would impose more and more conditions on them, for example, in terms of the economy and other areas. But let us remember that Europe was not built to be enlarged forever in the geographical terms, of course. Europe was construed to deepen the integration. Such geopolitical clarification needs to take place. Yes, Europe needs to be enlarged, but we also need to innovate its management. We need to have different formats of discussions, and we need to clearly define what the formats are responsible for, which format is responsible for what, and we need to make sure that Western Balkans, Moldova, and other countries which want to be part of the EU understand this. We need to build integration. These countries need to work or rule of law, and they need to adhere to the rules of the European institutions. I know that my speech was rather long, so I will finish very soon. I think that I mentioned the most important aspects. We need to build sustainable long-term peace in Ukraine. This is very important for the future of the entire continent. I'm sure that the upcoming months, or maybe 2 or 3 years, will be the most crucial. This was the strategic alarm clock. This was the wake-up call for Europe. So we have woken up, and I think that you know why I'm here today. You can count on France. France maybe used to be seen as an arrogant country which doesn't care about this part of Europe at all and its future, but this is not true. For us, each and every member state, each and every country is important for us. The EU, that's not just Brussels, that's all the capitals of the member states of the EU. There's no place for not cooperating together. We need to build together a stronger Europe. And we can't do it alone. We can't do it in trios. We can't do it as 3 countries. We need to really work together, 27 member states of the EU. And for that to happen, we need to have an open, honest, wide dialogue. Of course, respecting the differences among the countries. We need to also respect the national objectives that we have defined for ourselves in our respective member states. Europe is a large democratic power which is united. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You are known as a person one of a few leaders who can think strategically beyond emergencies, and I think you have proved it today, because you have laid out a very important vision in building Europe, enlarging it, and you have mentioned several very important things. First of all, you said that the special military operation, as Russians called it, have become a geopolitical failure for Russians. You also said how the peace should look like. It should be on Ukrainian terms, and there should be no compromises on the territory, which is very important to see, and also a peace that is just. So I will be opening the conversation now with Mr. President, so if I will see the hands here, please raise them up, and I will take question in 3. But let me take this opportunity and to ask you, because everybody is expecting the counteroffensive in Ukraine. And we all hope that Ukrainians will be able to push out Russians from their territory as much as possible, including Crimea. But how realistic those hopes are, in your opinion, and what happens ultimately if this fails? What does it mean for us, for Europeans? Will there be a fatigue?
Thank you very much. Look, I will not comment, or I would say make a different scenario on what is at stake, because we speak about real life and the future of Ukraine. I think all of us have been very impressed from the very beginning of this war by the ability of the Ukrainians to resist and to deliver such concrete results. And I think we were very much impressed, if I may say, by how the Russians resisted probably much more from the economic point of view than we thought, but how they delivered much less on the military side than we thought at the very beginning. And this is due to this Ukrainian commitment and their ability to be strategic, smart, brave, and perfectly well organized. So I do know that they are preparing very carefully this counteroffensive and the ability to sustain this war effort during months, not just to make a counteroffensive, but to sustain positions. I don't want to commend them because I don't want to weaken or jeopardize their ability to succeed, but I think this is a very important moment. I will not here deploy a sort of what-if scenario, because whatever happens, I do believe that they will deliver. It will not create de facto an acceptance from the Russians to negotiate. What we need in parallel is to make this counteroffensive credible because, first, we have to be very clear as Europeans that our support will stay strong and will last. This is very important. Second, if we provide clear and tangible security guarantees, this is where Vilnius will be very important. And third, if we re-engage what we call now, I'm not sure to be a big fan of this formula, but the Global South, I mean key countries, and at least the G20, to be sure that we involve them in the peace process, and a comprehensive peace process, which is not a ceasefire. So this is, for me, this cumulative efforts we have to provide in the coming months. Perhaps it will not be sufficient and the war will last. I think at that time we will have to reassess the situation to see how to calibrate our support at that time. But let's be clear, if we decrease our support, if de facto we accept a sort of a ceasefire or a frozen conflict, time will be on the Russian side. Mm-hmm. For sure. We have to be lucid about that. And this is why, given the effort made till now, and given the fact that this war is a matter of principle for the global order as well, and I think for the sustainability of the European security and safety, we should not accept such a scenario, and our reassessment during autumn and winter should be made at the light of what will happen in the coming months, but as well at the light of our strategic scenario, the one I tried to describe.
Thank you. And when there will be, the war will be over one day, and peace will be achieved, do you think Russians can come back to the international stage, and under which conditions?
I think it's too early to answer this question, because even starting to answer this question will make you, I would say, unacceptable. For sure, if and when this is a sustainable peace at the Ukrainian conditions and complying with international rules, de facto, Russia will be entitled to come back at the table of our international order, but it will depend on the outcome of such a negotiation.
And also, a just peace means that the war crimes that have been made will be punished, of course, in long term.
De facto, and this is why from day one we cooperated with Ukraine on this issue. And this is one, sustainable peace means as well having justice and trials.
Thank you. Mr. President, so let me open the conversation also to the room, and I've seen a question here on the left side. So Maria Mezantseva here, she's a member of the Ukrainian parliament, so if we have, you have the mic already, okay. So please keep it short, and I'm taking 3 questions at one round.
And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in live, raw, and unfiltered to the French President Emmanuel Macron speaking at the Globsec Forum there in Bratislava, Slovakia, spending a lot of time talking about the latest out of Ukraine and that battle against Russia. If this is still going on in a bit, we'll come back to that here shortly, but I want to switch gears, take a break, then we'll come back and talk about hurricane season. That does begin tomorrow, so a big day along the Atlantic coast. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox as we take a live look outside. That's Daytona Beach, Florida. There's a reason we're showing you this. We're about 16 hours away from the official start of the 2023 hurricane season. The tropics are already seeing some activity. Florida's coastal communities are working hard to make preventative measures for flooding like we saw last year. We do have Fox 35 Orlando's Randy Hildreth. She's live from New Smyrna Beach. And Randy, Hurricane Ian put a spotlight on flaws in the city's drainage system last year anyway.
Hey, good morning to you. And so what the city of New Smyrna Beach has done recently, they commissioned a months-long study to look into what could have been done to protect and prevent some of the flooding that we saw during Hurricane Ian. The good news in a way, and we're still working to get a copy of that study. The information was released during a meeting yesterday with the community. The good news is that it doesn't appear to be an infrastructure issue with all of the flooding that we saw. The bad news is that it appears that this was just, as we saw, a very powerful hurricane that dumped a lot of water. Ian dropped about 21 inches of rain in 24 hours. On top of that, 6 or so feet of storm surge stopped storm water from draining into the Indian River and ocean. So this was just a disastrous combination. Unfortunately, this months-long study found raising homes, which is very expensive, is about all that can be done to protect people from another round of dangerous flooding. It also found that areas in this community, the Venetian Bay and Coastal Woods developments, would have flooded the same way regardless of if those developments existed, because there were some concerns about that. We did get a chance to speak with the mayor yesterday about this study, and he says staff will still look at the information that's been collected, and they are still working to piece together an action plan to try and protect residents as best as they can.
The residents here are very concerned, as are we, with what we can do in the future, why this happened to us, and what do we do next.
And that what we can do next is the most important thing. Now that they have this study, we are working to get a copy of it so that we can dig into it a little bit more. Again, it was released to the community last night. And then also the mayor says that he is working on an action plan which he hopes to present to the city commission in the next month. Live this morning, Randy Hildreth, Fox 35 News.
And we'll certainly hope for a very quiet hurricane season. We'll see how it develops. Randy, thank you so much. We do appreciate you joining us. It's 8:48 on the East Coast, 5:48 in the morning over on the West Coast. Let's go ahead and take our last commercial break of the hour. Get that out of the way. Let's take a live look outside first, though, in New York City, outside the Fox Corporation building and the Fox Studios there. A busy day there in the Big Apple. Stay with us. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. We do have a live event happening. We'll listen in live, raw, and unfiltered to the French President Emmanuel Macron. He's speaking at the Globsec Forum. Right before we left him, he was talking about the latest in Ukraine and that battle against Russia, kind of giving a lot of insights as to where that battle stands. Let's go ahead and listen in.
We know it's not bulletproof. I think it's not sufficient to have a sort of Israel-type package. We need something much more substantial, and we need a path towards at least this membership. So something concrete, substantial, for the two reasons I mentioned. De facto, Ukraine is protecting us, and de facto, Ukraine is so well equipped that we have to re-anchor them in sort of security framework.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I see two questions here on the Slido. Some of you are asking, and they both have 88 likes, so I will ask them. Mr. President, do you still consider NATO a brain dead? And the second question, Mr. President, do you still, Mr. President, where is it? It's moving. If you look at Europe in 2050, so in long term, how dependent it will be on China when it comes to Green Deal, and how fragmented Europe will be in defense industry or armies?
Look, as for the first question, I answered it in my speech. I think NATO was clearly had a wake-up call by Russia, and I would say this is a native question. It's part of the DNA. So the reaction was prompt, efficient, and well-tailored, because it's this is a very well-known scenario. So I think NATO is very useful, and it was a strategic clarification. Now, let me complete that. Are we completely consistent, and do I think that the inconsistency I raised a few years ago are solved and fixed with the current context? No. NATO needs a European pillar, which is an indispensable complement, I mentioned it. NATO needs stronger Europe to protect itself, but being part as well of the security treaty. We have to clarify with some of our members, because some members of NATO still don't implement sanctions to Ukraine and sometimes help to alleviate the burden for the Russians. I'm not sure it's perfectly consistent with the NATO approach. And I think we will have in front of us some clarification. I think NATO is for North Atlantic, no, not for Southeast Asia. So my point is, if progressively or de facto we push NATO to enlarge the spectrum and the geography, we will make a big mistake. And I've always been very clear on that. This is part of the assessment I made. So my point is, clearly we had a wake-up call. Clearly NATO is very useful for interoperability and this kind of stuff, but it's not sufficient. We have still embedded risk, and it should not put us in a situation not to think about our future for ourselves as a pillar of NATO as European defense, but to invent ourselves our security architecture, which should not be reduced to NATO. As for our relationship with China regarding Green Deal and defense industry, I think so we have two issues. I think there is a big risk to be very dependent on Green Deal from China, but as well from the US. This is a consequence of a naive European Union during decades and a late wake-up call without sufficient delivery during the past 2 years, where the US decided to rush, for good reasons, by the way. I explain myself. We deployed like crazy solar panels in Europe during the 90s and beginning of the centuries. And we managed to deploy Chinese solar panels, sorry. I think if we want to succeed in our Green Deal, we need two additional things. We are the best in class in terms of regulation. Europe has clear targets. We created a Green Deal. We are one of the most regulated space regarding green industry and carbon emission of this world. But we invest less than China and the US, and we have less incentives. and we don't develop a sufficient industrial footprint compliant with this agenda. So more investment, more green industry. Here are the two pillars. This is exactly what I said in reaction to the IRA from the US. And I think we took the right decision during the past few months by taking a new framework, by precisely giving some flexibility on state aid and having a sort of European IRA. Is it sufficient? I'm not sure. Let's be lucid and let's assess what's happening and what will happen in the coming months. If you have a lot of big projects being allocated in the US and not in Europe, this is a problem for us. So we have to bridge the gap. We need this matching clause. And we have to be very careful because we have to bridge the gap with the US, but we have to avoid having just 2 or 3 big countries which could afford with bridging the gap, and some others being the collateral victims of this reallocation. So we need an investment strategy, an industrial strategy, if we don't want to be dependent on China in 2050 for our Green Deal. We set the standard, this is fair. Now we need to deliver and implement this regulation, no additional regulation, but till the end of this regulation and our agenda, to be clear, and more investment and more industrial strategy. For our defense industry and armies, I mean, this is in our hands. I tried to precisely describe what I do believe it's our interest. We need to simplify and harmonize our standards in terms of defense industry. We need to invest more, and we need a buy European approach for our defense. This is a matter of independence. And this is why, and in parallel, indeed, we need more integration and more intimacy between our armies. We have, I think, a clear advantage because we have interoperability provided by NATO. On top of that, we need common operations and common initiatives between Europeans. So I think it totally depends on us. I do believe that we can have much more integration in this regard.
Thank you very much. We still have few minutes left, so I'm looking in the room for the questions. I see on this side, first question and the second would come to the middle of the room.
Kim Dozier with Military Times and CNN. Sir, you mentioned during your speech that you don't want European security reliant on U.S. voters. Is France prepared to step up in terms of leadership and funding if the next U.S. president backs off in terms of leading the effort to help Ukraine and to fund Ukraine's war to survive Russia? Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question in the middle.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrej Žeravski. I'm BOD member of the nuclear company VUE. President Sir, it's possible to understand your speech we were listening several minutes ago as an ambition of France to reconquest the position of power and the responsible of power in a manner or in scale as it was between wars, meaning the 20s and 30s?
Interesting question.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Interesting question, and let's give one more last question to the audience. In this side, at the back.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour votre intervention. My question, I'm Younes, I'm from Global Diplomatic Forum in London. My question is, France is a big contributor to the EU, but on the other side is a big contributor to damaging EU reputation in parts of the world like Africa and Middle East and with Turkey as well. How do you think you're working on that to rectify this image, given that you mentioned that there is a not alliance with this global south? Thank you.
Thank you.
Look, let's be clear. As for the U.S. administration, as I mentioned, we are very lucky to have to have the Biden administration. First, because President Biden does understand and does love Europe. And it's been very clear from day one. And it delivered very, I think, reliable, concrete, and consistent agenda with us. I don't want to speculate on the results and the outcomes of the US election because it's probably, I don't exclude that the Russians are doing so. But as for France and as a European, I do hope we will have continuity in this approach. But whatever happens, because my point is not to make a what-if scenario, whatever happens, we have to increase our commitments, our investments, and our involvement. And de facto, the law we are passing in France for our defense is an increase of 100 billion euro of our war and defense effort. So yes, my answer, yes, we are ready. But my hope is that we will do it on top of the confirmation of a US commitment and a confirmation of the current US strategy. As for your question, I mean, it's very hard to say because the continent is not in the same situation and it's no more a continent of empires. This is a big difference with the Slavic approach at that time of well-known French foreign affairs ministers. But I do believe, yes, I would like France to be seen, perceived, and lived as a friendly, credible, and long-term ally and partner by all countries of this region for their security, for their energy as well, what we are developing in nuclear energy, in hydrogen, and so on is absolutely critical, in connections and in culture. And I think we have to build this new relationship and this new, not just place of friends, but partnerships and equal partnerships as well with this region in this new era without any empire. And I think I've always been very much impressed by how much populists in this region precisely use the perception of the EU, sometimes Brussels, and sometimes the condominium on France and Germany as a resurgence of past empires. And I think when I offer this partnership and I want to share vision and we build sincere partnerships with countries of the region, this is not to recreate this type of link, but a fair and equal approach. Because I don't neglect the fact that during the whole century, bold people in these countries fought against big empires. They don't want to be in this situation, to be submitted to a decision taken in Brussels or in other capitals. And this is my view of the European Union. And I think this is very important for all of us. If we want the European Union to be credible, and this is the message of France, we have to enlarge it, we have to make it a strong power, but we have to make it collectively, I speak for ourselves, less lecturing other people and more working with them for common interest. So this is a strategy. So not a replica of what we made 90 years ago, but a new approach. As for what you said and the perception in Africa, and sometimes Middle East, even if I would distinguish Middle East from Africa, and if I were very careful with that, it's clear that France is very much attacked on social networks and in part of African societies because of a new narrative saying that we are a colonial state and playing with our past. Sometimes this narrative was used by other big players of this region, but it's clearly a narrative pushed by Russia. And I speak from a country, in a country where Russian narrative, manipulation of information, disinformation on social networks is very well known. So let's not be naive collectively to buy at face value the power of this narrative. I think we made a big mistake. We made several mistakes in Africa. Number one, we consider that we can provide security guarantees without a full-fledged political commitment of the governments and the countries themselves. This is what happened in Mali. And this is why I completely reassess this position and I redefine our strategy as a partnership approach, taking security as part of the other pillars with civil societies and so on, but a much more equal partnership. But the European and especially the French are not in a situation to be a substitute to a government to provide security in place of them, but to fight against terrorism at the request of the government and in close partnership with civil societies and so on. Second, we were definitely too naive, and we let the information space to some spoilers, and especially the Russians. And they conveyed, with a lot of efficiency, anti-European and especially anti-French narrative. Does it mean that it's true? No. Those who are in a sort of colonial approach in this country are those who are providing unsustainable debt, taking assets in exchange of this debt, or sending mercenaries to take control of some mining activities or providing security to, some people in order to replace legitimate governments. Here are the spoilers of Africa, not the Europeans. And we defined a new approach and a new ambition during the European Union, African Union summit beginning of 2022. Now we have to deliver, and this is efficiency of our approach. Partnership and respect in Africa and Middle East of this approach is absolutely key, but we have to be much more, let's say, aggressive on the information space in order to fight against this, let's be clear, Russian narrative. It will allow me to make an additional remark to my speech and my answers. Indeed, and we had the opportunity to discuss with some intellectuals before, I spoke about the war, I spoke about the front line we all of us see. But in all our countries, we are invisible front lines on which the Russians will play, which is the support to this war, the support to Ukraine, and how playing with some movements and political movements, pushing fake information, pushing this type of narrative, Russia, with some proxies, is using informational space to play on war fatigue and to weaken our support. This war is absolutely critical, especially in democracies, because democracy have a sort of native weakness in comparison with authoritarian regime. They have public opinions, and it matters because people go to vote. And especially when you have big manipulations in this period of time, and I speak in front of some candidates for the upcoming election in this country, it's absolutely vital to be sure that we have a fair, loyal space of information, because how to frame public opinion is as important as how people will vote tomorrow. And we did care about education, we did care about rule of law, we did care about independence of justice, journalism, and conditions of re-election, which is very important, and we have to protect all these pillars. But we should not forget the way public opinion is forged in our current democracy. It's through these social networks. And these social networks, these platforms, are used today by Russia much more efficiently than what we do. This is why we have to increase and strengthen as well our, let's call it, democratic war effort as well. This is an absolute complement of the strategy I tried to describe.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm extremely happy that you exactly finished on the point of the information war that is going inside of our societies. We need to win at home in order to be able to win in Ukraine, and we have to win on all front lines. So you brought a unique blend of style and substance to the stage, Mr. President. So that is going, your leadership and commitment in promoting global stability and resilience is very important, and we as Central Europeans are with you. So we take this as an invitation to work more together in the future, and let me extend my invitation to you to come back to the Globsec Forum next year. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Mr. President.
And looks like that event there is wrapping up. We'll switch gears here to a look at New York City, looking towards the Empire State Building. Let's go ahead and take our first commercial break of the hour. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with plenty more here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I want to bring this back up here, talking about, actually I believe this pertains to Hungary. I was going to say something else, but this is the country of Hungary. They're trying to get access to some funds in the European Union that are attached to pandemic funding for relief efforts there. They haven't gotten that money, so that's what this is about here. This is from the EU Parliament having that discussion about Hungary and those funds that are frozen up right now. Let's take a listen.
Most of people will be back, I guess, but a number of newcomers, and we're asking a new parliament, maybe with a new president. You don't know. I mean, we're asking all of these people to immediately, in 1 week, take the decision to boycott. So we can only do recommendation. We can say this parliament what we think should be done, but, you know, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, once again, all of this will not have an effect on, I mean, I think that some of Sophie's ideas are very, very good, and specifically the one on putting on the podium other people of Hungary and not only the government, but that will not change the fact that the parliament will not be managed to prevent the Hungarian government to take certain stands publicly. If they go on an official mission, it won't be able to prevent some missions. It won't be able to prevent if they invite someone that we don't agree with. I mean, all of this the power of the Parliament, if it was to exercise it, and I'm very sorry because most of the time it doesn't. I mean, we are probably some of the MEPs that would like sometimes this Parliament to be more powerful, but they doesn't always exercise completely its power. But even if it was, it has a limited stretch. The last question I really did not understand, because I think that a number of examples was given that specifically it's what the tone that you set for presidency and what you say. We all know that has an importance. Some presidency wants to give a social color to their presidency. Some presidency want to give fundamental rights color to their presidency. Some will be very high-tech. I mean, what you put on the agenda, what press conference you organize, who you go to meet, who you invite, has a signification and brings something in the public debate. So, yeah, that is very damageable if a Hungarian government decides to use this as to serve their own narrative, as Thijs said. And anyway, and I will finish on this, I mean, once again, we have this Article 7 procedure. It's in the treaty. What does it mean when a country has been declining since 12 years? First resolution of this Parliament, I always recall, is from 2011. 2011, this Parliament was already flagging, we have a concern, a huge concern, not a little one. 12 years of declining and 5 years under Article 7 procedure. And you just can have your presidency like that, like any other government, any other member states. You have the same privilege, you have the same rights. I mean, how does this function? Shouldn't we be questioning this? I even think that if there were one day changes in treaties, we should think about the fact that after a certain time doing how long can you stay in Article 7 procedure? 15 years, 20 years, and nothing happens? How is this logical? How is European Union defending itself in that sort of case?
All right. I think a couple of MPs have something to add, or maybe...
Well, maybe to add to Gwendolyn, if I may, on the question on the Janša government. I disagree. I vividly remember, for example, just an example, the communique after the fall of Kabul, which was clearly inspired by a toxic, very bad narrative, because the Council is holding the pen. The Council is holding the pen when starting with these communiques. And also, the Janša government only just started, very much inspired by his good friend Orban. So I would say, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because this government, and Orban in particular, clearly expressed that he wants to push his agenda, that he wants to use this presidency. So I think that the comparison with the Janša government, that fortunately also gives us the example of a country that can change for the better. But I think he was only just starting, and I think this is clearly a point where I think the Council does not understand the seriousness of what is ahead of us.
Yes, again, we move ourselves and we respect the treaty. So there are prerogatives for the European Parliament, there are others for the Council. So I again want to reiterate that we ask the Council to act. And Gwendolyn said it in the beginning. She was looking what are the margins in which they can act. What does the treaty allow or not allow? I did the same. I'm convinced that Article 7 allows the Council to suspend the country of certain rights deriving from the applications of the treaties, when that country fails systematically and over time to respect the fundamental values of the European Union, enshrined in the Article 2. So this gives the Council, not us, but the Council, a large maneuver possibilities. And they should really act, because this is not something that will be easy. And in fact, it will be. We have to think about the European Union as this strong democratic institution, and what can come is not easy for the European Union, for what we give as an image to the world.
One sentence, Sophie. Yes. Well, I think we should also look, in addition to what has already been said, at whether the failure of the Council to take any steps vis-à-vis Hungary, and specifically with regard to the presidency, because I agree with Isabel that there are definitely legal possibilities, but whether their behaviour doesn't qualify as a lack of sincere cooperation. We shouldn't only be looking at Hungary, we should also be looking at the Council, because let's not forget that the only reason that Mr. Orban has this power is because of the European Council. It's the only body that is giving him this power. Nothing else, not even his own government. It's the veto, it's the fact that they all want to remain friends because they're going to need his support for something else. It's a perverse system. And they're keeping him powerful. So they're giving him all the tools, all the weapons. So I think the European Parliament should also, become a little bit more of a political animal and enter into the fight with the European Council and the Commission as well. I mean, we're very good as a legislator, but it's about time that we start to play hardball. Because yes, we're asking them to scrap the Hungarian presidency, but maybe we should also look at consequences for the cooperation with those two bodies. As to conditions, we could ask him to become a Democrat again. Not very likely. I mean, he might as well become an astronaut or a ballet dancer. On Saluja, you mentioned boycotting the trilogues. I want to be clear. I wasn't calling for a boycott of the trilogues. I'm saying the trilogues are not a formal instrument. They're an informal arrangement for negotiations in order to, not get into second reading and third reading. But we're not obliged to do it. We can just go through the procedure and do first reading, second reading, third reading if necessary. And with regard to damages, I think you've already highlighted a couple of situations. At the same time, I think we should also not overestimate it. We're talking about the rotating council presidency. It's not as if they're it's not as if they're passing laws by decree or something like that, but it's the visibility, it's the podium that they get. So that is, I think, where we also have to, assuming that the council is not going to have the cojones to strip him of his presidency, we should focus on how do we reduce it to the bare minimum, and where we cannot avoid giving the Hungarian presidency the podium, we'll put somebody else next to him.
Yeah, well, I think that, to have a presidency that is no longer can be defined as a democracy, heading the EU work for 6 months, it's just a no-go. It should be a no-go. And I'm actually ashamed on behalf of the Commission and the Council at this press conference repeating mechanically speaking notes. That's just not good enough. It's not good enough. And I would say to them that you use the tools at your disposal according to the treaty.
And if you're just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in to an event in the EU Parliament talking about the latest out of Hungary with those funds, those pandemic funds for recovery efforts still frozen. Hungary's trying to get access to those. We'll stay on top of that story for you here. I want to switch gears to something a little different today. Let's dive into the world of the mysterious, talking about UFOs, or UAPs as they are sometimes called. NASA's independent study team is set to make some announcements later today. Will they say the aliens have landed? Who knows? But we do have Jonathan Seary with the Fox News Channel. He joins us live with a bit of a preview. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Zach. I'm still trying to get used to the new term. For decades, they were called UFOs. That's what I called them growing up. Now they are referred to as UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, or if you work for NASA, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, either way. Once relegated to the realm of science fiction and conspiracy theorists, improved documentation by military pilots and video evidence have convinced increasing numbers of scientists scientists, these unexplained objects in the sky are real. Scientists aren't ready to say the sightings are proof of extraterrestrials and cannot rule out the possibility that they're either natural phenomena or created by humans, but they do believe they're worth further study. And now the most respected government space agency is holding a public hearing later this morning to figure out how to do it. NASA says, quote, exploring the unknown in space and the atmosphere is at the heart of who we are. The nature of science is to better understand the unknown, but the language of scientists is data, end quote. NASA points out that there is not a lot of solid data to study, so rather than examining past sightings at this public meeting, they really are seeking information on how to gather raw data going forward. In other words, learning how to study UAP. And Zach, it has been a busy past 24 hours for NASA. The space agency supervised the splashdown of Axiom 2 late last night. That was the second privately crewed mission to the International Space Station. NASA is increasingly looking to forming partnerships with private companies to perform missions in low Earth orbit as NASA sets its sights on returning to the moon and eventually landing the first humans on Mars and potentially solving the mystery of UAP. Zach?
Well, you know what's interesting, and I kind of want to ask you about this. I feel like there was a time and place we couldn't really talk about UFOs or UAPs, and here we are on television right now doing a live shot on it. What do you make of that? It's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, before a lot of people were afraid to come forward, especially professional pilots, either commercial or military, because they thought it was potentially career-ending, that they would be ridiculed or that their sanity would be questioned. But now there really is enough evidence documented that these strange sightings are real. They don't know that it's aliens. It may be something perfectly explainable, something natural, or you know, if you want to become paranoid, maybe some foreign government. They're not saying yet that it's proof of extraterrestrials, but they do want pilots and others to come forward because they really do believe that these are real objects that are being sighted, and if more people come forward with credible evidence and credible information, perhaps they'll be able to solve the mystery.
We'll see what comes out on those announcements later today. Jonathan Sear of the Fox News Channel joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
It's 9:28 on the East Coast, 6:28 over on the West Coast. Let's take another commercial break. We'll be right back with plenty more here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox, as we're going to listen in live, raw, and unfiltered to yet another live event happening this morning. We've had quite a few today. This is the Slovakian Prime Minister, Croatian Prime Minister, and Czech Republic Prime Minister. They're speaking about something that's titled The Front Lines of Democracy, Global Consequences of the War. Let's go ahead and bring that audio up and listen in and see what they're talking about.
I'd like to build on this last word, continuity, that what was really important for me is to continue with our efforts to help Ukraine at all fronts, to show that we are a reliable partner both in the European Union and also in the NATO. We would like to look also at potential other compensation mechanisms for the households. The previous government approved a lot of measures there. So there was also some energy price freeze in terms of the in terms of electricity. To be honest, I'm not in favor of freezing those prices, because I really think that we need to go ahead also on the greening of the economy. So either conditionally to freeze the prices if they can decrease the usage of energies, or to at least to some extent put the burden also on the well-off households, because otherwise, we will never make that transition. So I'm not far away from what my colleague is saying, but in a limited amount, I can imagine, at least for the well-off households, increase in the prices, which is also beneficial from a longer-term perspective. But what we would like to do is to focus on the poorest segments of the households in order to find out to what extent we can still help with some support from the government. And of course, as you touched upon, the budget will be essential for the future, because we had huge shocks here, and the government had to support the economy in very difficult times, and now it's time to reverse all those things. And politically, it can be very sensitive, but for an expert government, our job is a bit easier to sell the public that, look, we need to think about, at least to think about plans, how to go back to more sustainable levels of the budget deficit. So that will be one of our priorities. But these are just what we can do in a short term. I would like to also focus a bit on the longer term, so that is why I'm talking about 3+3 priorities for every minister, because I would like to talk about the future. We are rarely talking about future in this country. Usually we are focusing on personal animosities and other kind of political things. And what we are really missing is to somehow show the young generation that Slovakia is a place where there is a future for them. We have a huge problems with brain drain. We have 20,000 students abroad, and we are not able to attract also smart brains from abroad. And this should be worked out, what can we do about it. So we will present a plan for it. We present a plan how to do more effectively support for the poor people, because usually we are doing across the board transfers, because we cannot identify who is poor and who is not really at the family level, and also on the effective usage of EU funds. So at least we would like to present blueprints for the next government, how to do things to have a better.
And if you're just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, I want to switch gears and go to another live event we have happening right now. Jury selection begins today, or actually, yes, today, for a former deputy set to go on trial for failing to confront the gunman involved in a deadly massacre at a Florida high school 5 years ago. Former Broward County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson remained outside of a building at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland as Nicholas Cruz carried out his attack, murdering 14 students. This is the jury selection. Let's go ahead and bring the audio up and listen in live, raw, and unfiltered. And it looks like they just killed the audio on that for a brief second, so let's get into some of the other details here. Investigators say Peterson arrived at the school, that's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, with his gun drawn more than a minute before crews reached the 3rd floor, but instead of entering, he backed away. The 60-year-old is charged with 7 counts of felony child neglect for the 4 students killed and 3 wounded on that floor of the building. He also faces 3 misdemeanor counts of culpable negligence for the adult shot on the 3rd floor, along with a perjury charge for allegedly lying to investigators. Opening statements in the trial for Peterson are scheduled for early June, and the trial could last for 2 months. But right now, this is jury selection. So we do have this live shot here. Let's go ahead and bring the audio up and listen in and see if we can hear anything. And it looks like the audio is still cut off there, so when that comes back up, we'll dip back into this. But I want to switch gears and go back to this Globsec meeting in Bratislava, Slovakia. Let's go ahead and listen in.
At the end of the year, presidential elections, in May of 2025, local elections, so we'll be done and over with the elections, and we'll have the second part of the decade to work in peace. So it's coming after a solid period of stability. When I became a prime minister, my main mantra was the political stability of Croatia. And I can assure you that it was the key reason why we made all the advances that we did, both in terms of sound management of public finances, joining Eurozone, joining Schengen, connecting Croatian South with the Pelješac Bridge, which is the biggest and the most visible European Union finance project in the first 7 years of our membership, and a number of other things, including the infrastructure, including the social cohesion. So I would say generally a month before the 10th anniversary of our membership in the European Union, I think people are growing more and more aware how much we were supported by the EU funds to realize our national strategic objectives. This is what I call the politics of modern sovereignism, which I try to implement with the state interventionism in the context of crisis. We gave 6.8 billion euros to citizens and economy combined COVID-19 and Russia's aggression against Ukraine. When it comes to policy on Ukraine, Ukraine was among the first 5 countries to have internationally recognized Croatia before than all the members at the time of the European Union. They were the members of the United Nations at the time, and there is a strong historical friendly relationship between the two peoples. And if there is one country on the European continent that should have an immediate reflex of solidarity and support to Ukraine, it's us. We were the victims of the greater Serbian policy of Milosevic's regime in the 90s. We had our territories occupied, we had huge war damages, we had 15,000 people who died in that homeland war, and it took us quite a lot of effort, both in terms of victims, but also in terms of time and the lost momentum of EU integration in the 90s, until we have regained our territory by police and military operations in 95, and the critical aspect of the most successful United Nations peace mission, which was called United Nations Transitional Administration of Eastern Slavonia, where the whole process was led by the American General Klein, and the eastern part of Croatia was liberated without one bullet being fired, and the entire formerly occupied area became part of our constitutional legal order. And that is what I was advocating for many, many years, since 2014 and the temporary occupation of Donetsk, Lugansk and Crimea. So solidarity with Ukraine and support to Ukrainians, it's like almost a reflex policy. It's not a premeditated, calculated policy of my government, because I think we are doing the right things in accordance with our values. And also interest, given that we have been anchored in the European Union and NATO.
But your president doesn't agree with you.
That's his
and that
part.
Is an echoing voice you're hearing.
I always try to avoid comments of this nature in international fora. But the critical thing is that the parliamentary majority, which is led by my party and me as a prime minister, has been on the right side of history and has extensively supported Ukraine, both in military terms, in political, diplomatic, economic, financial, humanitarian. We are now in the lead, helping them in the process that is yet to arrive, that is the demining, unfortunate experience of Croatia, which will be only fully completed in 2026. And the second one, and also our former president is very active in that respect, sharing the experience of processing war crimes. Because we had specialized prosecutors, specialized police investigators, specialized judges, and with a group of other countries and experts, we are offering to Ukrainians what we believe is an added value from a country of 4.4 million people.
So are you at all worried, both of you, considering that you both were talking about disinformation, are you both worried about potentially a shift in policy and attitude here in Slovakia in September, next year in Croatia, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to the value system that we've all spent 3 days talking about? Is there a potential for shift? Prime Minister Oder?
Definitely, there is a risk of it. If we see the polls, that there are a lot of parties in the parliament or in the polls with relatively big support who are, questioning a bit our policies towards Ukraine. So that is also one of the reasons why the President of the Republic here decided to calm down the situation a bit and, to install an expert government in order to a bit counterbalance those voices and, very calmly tell the public where our priorities are, what are the benefits of being an EU member, what are the benefits of being in NATO. So these are very important aspects to explain. And sometimes it helps if the public can hear this from an expert government than from a kind of a political opposition or political coalition. So we are definitely here to at least try to persuade the public that these policies are the right ones for Slovakia and basically the only ones we can do in this situation. But the risk is there and we need to work hard to avoid that kind of scenario in Slovakia.
Prime Minister?
Well, I believe that Croats are very sensible people and they will make the right choices when the election comes and we will make sure that we present to them who stands for what. And that before the elections, not saying one thing before and then doing the other thing after the elections. This is in life very important to recognize on time. My feeling is that we have to be very careful because the influence is sort of capillary. It comes from everywhere when it makes it visible in public debate through political actors, business sector, energy sector, media sector. The impact of disinformation and the line that is more convenient to the Kremlin's narrative, we have also seen it. I was shocked in 2016 after my first visit to Ukraine as a Croatian Prime Minister. It was my second foreign visit after Bosnia and Herzegovina. Only after the visit I realized how influence was strong. It was as if there were many sleepers who just woke up in a very coordinated manner. So we are aware of it, but I think that the majority of the population is clearly distinguishing the good.
And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we're listening in live, raw, and unfiltered to the Globsec Forum, where they're talking about, this is the title anyway, Frontlines of Democracy, Global Consequences of War. As you could probably guess, talking a lot about Ukraine and Russia. I do want to take our third commercial break of this hour. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just 2 short minutes with more here on Live Now from Fox. And welcome back to Live Now from Fox. Tomorrow marks the start of hurricane season. The official start of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season is less than 24 hours away. Last year, Hurricanes Ian and Nicole brought catastrophic damage to Florida's coast while impacting several other states along the way, including the Carolinas and Virginia. Here to talk about what we can expect this hurricane season is Dan Brown, warning coordination meteorologist at NOAA's National Hurricane Center. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning.
So what do you think this hurricane season is going to look like? That's kind of the big question. Is it going to be intense or a little drawn back as compared to last year?
Yeah, last year was a near average hurricane season, but as you just mentioned, it was very impactful in the United States with both Ian and Nicole. So far, the NOAA's hurricane season outlook that's been issued suggests we might have near normal conditions. But again, we can't get too distracted by that or the fact that we may have El Nino, which typically suppresses hurricane activity because it only takes one hurricane to hit your area for it to be a bad hurricane season. And again, last year we saw that with Ian, which was the costliest hurricane in Florida's history.
And when does the hurricane season typically begin to pick up? It's not right at the get-go. There's a bit of a buildup, yeah?
Early in the season, we can sometimes have tropical storms that form in the Gulf of Mexico, Southwest Atlantic, maybe impacting places like Florida, maybe the Southeast U.S. We're actually watching a system currently that has a low chance of formation over the next few days, but it may bring some rainfall to Florida. But as you're right, the hurricane season typically doesn't get super active until we get into August. Middle of August, September, and October are the most active periods, and that's when we typically see the major hurricanes like we had with Ian and Ida the previous year. Those typically happen during those few months in the late summer and early fall.
And so hurricanes, they bring a multitude of problems. One of the biggest ones, flooding, of course. How do people prepare for something like that?
Yeah, so the biggest concern we have with hurricanes is really that storm surge, and that's where the winds of the hurricane blow that ocean water on shore. We saw that last year in Southwest Florida near Fort Myers with Hurricane Ian, brought a devastating storm surge to that section of coastline. But as you mentioned, we're also concerned with flooding rainfall. With Ida, it had moved inland, weakened, but yet it's produced a tremendous amount of flooding rainfall up in the New York, New Jersey area. So again, we have to remember that water accounts for about 9 out of 10 deaths in hurricanes. That's what we really have to focus on, not as much the wind. You kind of hide from the wind, but we want you to run from the water, especially storm surge, and evacuate if you live in those storm surge evacuation zones.
And for people that maybe don't evacuate, maybe they don't heed those warnings and they stick around, what should they do post-hurricane? It's not good to be out roaming around, right? What do they do?
Yeah, so, we've looked at fatality studies before and after hurricanes, and we're now losing as many people after the storm as during. So during the storm, it's often caused by the storm surge, trees falling, impacts from the storm, but afterwards, it's things like heart attacks, it's improper use of generators where you're getting carbon monoxide poisoning, accidents, people using power tools that they have never used before. So after the hurricane, you have to stay safe. Ask for other people's help when it comes to cleanup, and especially if you're a part of the older population, is just take it easy, hydrate. Help is not going to be as readily available.
And what is the state of Florida doing to prepare? What have you heard?
We work very closely with local and state emergency managers. In fact, we had some briefings with some of the folks from Miami-Dade and Broward counties just yesterday. Again, making sure everybody is up to date with the latest science, the latest on the Hurricane Center products, and just making sure that they're able to make those evacuation decisions. We at the Hurricane Center, we make the forecast for the storms, and it's those local and state emergency managers that often make those evacuation decisions when it comes to preparing their local communities and making sure folks get out of harm's way.
Great stuff. Very important information. That's pretty much all the questions I had, but as I always do with everyone, I want to turn it over to you. Anything I missed, glazed over, that you want to add that I didn't ask about?
Just wanted to say, find out today if you live in an evacuation zone. Hurricane season starts tomorrow. Make sure you're prepared this hurricane season. And again, as I already stressed once, after the storm, let's check on each other, make sure we're staying safe. We want to make sure you get through this hurricane season safe.
A lot of great advice, a lot of great information. Dan Brown, warning coordination meteorologist at NOAA's National Hurricane Center. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. You take care.
Thank you.
It's 9:51 on the East Coast, 6:51 over on the West Coast. Let's go ahead and take our last commercial break of the hour. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with plenty more here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. We still have this live event happening here. This is that Globsec meeting where they're talking about what's known as the front lines of democracy, global consequences of war. That's kind of the title of it. They've spent a great deal of time talking about Ukraine and that ongoing war there against Russia. Some pretty interesting updates. Let's go ahead and bring that audio up and listen in.
Some of my priorities. The one thing which is partially related to this discussion is that we have a lot of money offered to us by other European citizens, either in the NGEU or the European funds. And, I would like to make sure that this money is really coming to Slovakia in order to show the citizens what are the benefits, also before elections, benefits of the EU membership and how important that is to stay inside the European Union also after elections. The second one is about the future. How to persuade the young generation on what kind of perspective we can offer them to stay here. How can we attract, talents from abroad? So we are working on a strategy how to change completely a policy in that regard to offer something for the next generation. And the third priority is about the weak households or financially not well-off households, where in our country there is usually one type of policy that if somebody would like to help poorer households, they increase pensions. But pensioners are not the only category. We would like to focus on much more on other vulnerable groups, and we would like to identify them and prepare a plan for the government. Because we cannot afford to help everybody. We need to be really targeted also in relation to the energy crisis. So these are the three things among many others, but these three are on my radar every day. I'm monitoring it every day on my monitor, and if something goes wrong, I can intervene immediately.
How confident are you, as a final question, how confident are you that you will achieve some of the 6 goals? How many of the 6 goals do you think you'll achieve? The 3?
6.
All 6. That's a confident Prime Minister indeed.
Why to set goals if I tell in advance that I will not achieve them? So
Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us, both of you, for being here. I know you have to rush out for a meeting, so I do want to ensure that we do not make you late for that. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite you guys back to wrap up the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maitri. And everyone, if we could wait just 2 more minutes, we have a final goodbye from Robert Varsh, but we also wanted to talk about a couple of highlights. Everything from the French president.
Yes.
And I'm going to be a pushy moderator. May I invite both of you to leave? We literally might lose the walls at 4 in a couple of minutes. So, cheers. So we've heard from the French president, prime ministers, ministers of state, a lot of support for worry about Ukraine, but support for Ukraine going forward.
A little bit of all, Yeah. Thank you. I want to thank everyone here. My highlight is really seeing all of you. This is a professional conference, and thanking Robert Varsh for gathering everyone so that, especially after the COVID years, that we get to see each other and fulfill the mission of this conference, which was breakthrough with new ideas, new solutions. I think I heard a few of those this week.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Robert.
Robert, send us home.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and also those who have been able to stay here in this room for 3 days. I think we are, after these 3 days, much more rich intellectually in the conversations that we have had. And ladies and gentlemen, let me thank all of you who have came here and contributed to the very important discussion, because it was really enriching. And I have to say that we had the strongest delegation in the history of Globsec. Now we have the 18th year, so it's the adulthood of this conference here in Central Europe. But I think that the mission of this conference has never been more important. When we are on the front lines of the war with Russia, and not only we are fighting the war in Ukraine and our Ukrainian friends, but also we are fighting another war inside of our societies, the information war, and President Macron has said that very clearly. It's about how important it is to continue the support to Ukraine, because we are not just helping a sovereign nation to sustain itself, but we are fighting for the future and base of the international law. We are sending a clear signal to everybody that aggression will not go unpunished, and that we are not willing to bring back the jungle, but we want to build a world that is based on rules. And the third point that we talked about a lot is the global cooperation, because the Ukraine crisis looks differently from Europe, as from India, as from the other parts of the world. And we talked about a lot about how to engage with the global south, how to engage with other parts of the world, and how important it is that we are building a global coalition to make sure that our world is more prosperous, stable, and peaceful. And exactly peace. I have heard this word said so many times. Nobody wishes peace more than Ukrainians who are dying on the front lines, and us who are helping them. But the peace needs to be sustainable, it needs to be just, and it needs to be lasting. So we need to prosecute all the war crimes that have been done in Ukraine, and we cannot allow these crimes to go unpunished, because that's also a wrong signal to everybody else in the future. But let me thank you to all who came, 1,500 participants from 70 countries, actually. It's quite impressive number. We had a very strong presence online. Some of the events were streamed in the international media. And we had actually 200 journalists from 30 regional and international media. I think it's really impressive. We also have gathered 27 young leaders from 16 countries at the 10th edition of the forum. And we have organized more than 200 side events, side meetings, and different meetings on the sidelines. And when I participated on some of them, I have to say, I always say that the heart of the conference is here in this room and the other rooms, the main rooms, on the discussion when it goes on. But the soul of the conference is really on the sidelines, on the corridors, on the meeting places that are going on, because this place can bring together people to one place for the solutions for peace for the future. So that's, I think, remarkable what the team has achieved. So I would like to thank to all of our partners who have supported this conference. First of all, the board, chaired by Willy Molterer, and all the board for your intellectual guidance for us, which was very important because we have gone through really changes of the governments, not only here, but political shake-ups recently that affected the conference. But we were like a ship in the middle of the storm and tried to sustain everything that was going on us. And thanks for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, in the both governments that have changed in the last 2 weeks, but also the Austrian government and Minister Schallenberg, the Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs Lipavsky. And let me name also the institutional and corporate partners, International Visegrad Fund, NATO, Wilfried Martin Center, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Ministry of Investment, but also the corporate partners like Google, KNDS, Microsoft, Saab, BMW, Amazon, ESET, General Dynamics, Helsing, Lockheed Martin, Palantir, and many, many other Globsec partners and members with support, this conference would be absolutely not possible to organize. I think they deserve an applause. And I would like to also thank to the hotel for hosting us, the police force, but mostly the Globsec team. I'm very proud of the team of Globsec. And when I see those people who have such a resilience with so many changing requests from all the ministers and all the partners coming in, I'm always saying that if you organize a concert, it's quite easy because you have one star, you focus on that star, you have a list of 25 requests, and you fulfill those requests, you have a checklist, you do it, and then everybody else comes. This conference is about everybody who comes here, because everybody is important. Everybody has change plans, requests, etc. And the team that has been working on it is exposed to thousands and thousands of these requests. And I really want to thank you, because without your endurance and resilience at nights, many times, it would be absolutely impossible. So let me name a few of them. Milan Solar, Natalia Ferenc, Daniel Hošták, Lucia Rybníkárová, Nadia Jesenská, Adam Horehaj, Federica, Molly, Teresa, Barbara, and many, many other people who have been working in the team. And actually, when I looked at also the interns who have been working for Globsec in the last couple of days, and you've seen them in the corridors responding to your requests, there are 200 young people from 25 countries. Remarkable that they come free of charge, they help, they don't sleep, but they are convinced that also within this forum, as we gather people, we can change the world. And that's the huge belief that the young generation brings. And when I look at those young people and those young generations, I think that there is the future of this country and of Central Europe, because they are showing the courage and the vision where the ambition of this country and this region could be. So I think you deserve a great applause. And they will have an after party, so you will be welcome to also have some fun later today. So with that, I would like to thank all of you. I see Milan here. You didn't stand up, so please stand up, because you're really a master of this.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. The time is 10:05 if you are over on the East Coast, and it is 7:05 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here to bring you all of your top stories from across the country and across the world. A lot of live events to get to, and coming up here in just about 24 minutes, we expect that NASA will host its first ever public forum here with a 16-member panel. They are going to discuss UFOs, and we're going to have an expert here to help break it all down for us. But that hearing expected to go on for about 4 hours, so we'll bring it to you live, raw, and unfiltered. Let's head to our first 2-minute commercial break of the hour, and on the other side, right back into your headlines and live events. You're watching Live Now from Fox. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox. The time is 10:08 over on the East Coast, and it is 7:08 on the West Coast. Thank you so much for being with us here for all your top stories and live events. I do want to get back into the headlines here, and nearly 2,000 Amazon workers plan a walkout today at the company's Seattle headquarters. They're demanding flexible remote work and a better response to Amazon's impact on the planet and on climate change. Workers saying that they're also upset about a return to the office and layoffs. Dan Griffin with our Fox Seattle team joins us now live to talk more about that planned walkout. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah. Well, and good morning to you, Josh. Yeah, from here on the West Coast, you know, here is going to be basically ground zero for where these workers are going to come out here. They're going to be protesting in a sense. They're going to do this walkout during the lunch hour. They're wanting to vocalize their displeasure with the recent moves by Amazon being forced back into the office. They're really not happy about the layoffs. They're planning this lunch hour walkout. The Seattle Times here in town reporting more than 1,700 employees plan to walk out today as an effort by Amazon Employees for Climate Justice and Amazon's remote advocacy community leaders. A spokesman says there are more than 65,000 employees in the Puget Sound region headquarters, and the paper's reporting about 830 plan to physically walk out of Seattle's headquarters, while another 890 will join offices from around the world. Many of them are basically saying that they are not happy with the return to office policy, though the CEO has said the return makes it easier to learn, model, practice, strengthen the culture. And meanwhile, 27,000 jobs have been slashed since November in roles ranging from human resources to gaming and AWS. And also, Amazon has ended other projects, including Amazon Care, a venture into healthcare, and workers say the company has had a sluggish response to address its climate impact on the planet. So the company has given me a couple of statements here saying that they remain on track to get to 100% renewable energy by 2025 and will continue investing substantially. They also say that they understand it's going to take time to adjust to being back in the office more, but their teams are obviously working together at the company to make the transition as smooth as possible. Again, this protest, this walkout in a sense, expected to take place today from noon to 1 here at the Amazon Spheres. It's in the South Lake Union area of downtown, so we're going to be here through the day watching this very closely.
All right, Dan Griffin there with our Fox 13 Seattle team. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and we'll see how that all plays out. It is 10:11 over on the East Coast and 7:11 on the West Coast. Let's take a quick look at the stock board right now. As you can see, starting off the day in the red, down about 0.7%. That is the Dow right there on your screen, and we'll take a live look all throughout the day. Let's head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, and on the other side, right back into your headlines and live events. You're watching Live Now from Fox. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 10:14 on the East Coast and 7:14 on the West Coast. In just about 15 minutes, a NASA panel will host its first public meeting on UFOs or UAPs, commonly known as unidentified flying objects. The government does refer to them as unidentified aerial phenomena. This 4-hour meeting comes ahead of a report expected in the coming weeks here. Dr. Avi Loeb is a Harvard astrophysicist and joins us live to discuss more about all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot of people have heard the term UFO. We're now hearing about this other term as well, UPA. What exactly is that? I kind of want to go back to basics here.
It's just a name, and it implies objects that are not identified, perhaps flying in the atmosphere. There are some reports about them going into the ocean. We don't know what they are. That's what distinguishes them from familiar objects. And of course, you know, some of them may be balloons, some of them may be drones or airplanes or birds, but we don't know what they are because the images are fuzzy and the data is incomplete.
So many people equate UFOs or UAPs with aliens. Is that necessarily what we're talking about? As you mentioned, you're talking about other objects that just clearly haven't been identified. They could be pretty much anything.
Right. I think it's a mixed bag, and most of the objects are probably human-made. In fact, the Director of National Intelligence in the latest 2022 report to the US Congress mentioned that perhaps half of them are balloons. And we know that a few months ago, the US government shot 4 objects that looked like balloons. So it's very likely that many of them are unidentified simply because they're far away and the cameras do not have good enough resolution. The only question for me as a scientist is whether 1 out of 1,000 may be from an extraterrestrial origin. As a scientist, that would be very intriguing. I'm not particularly interested in anything made in China, but that's of course of interest to the US government and anything related to national security. So in a way, when we think about aliens, that's complementary to all other risks that the government assesses.
And of course, a lot of people do want to know if these are extraterrestrial in nature, even if it is just 1 out of 1,000, let's say. What is the significance of this NASA panel coming together and holding a public meeting for people to watch at home or wherever they are?
The most significant outcome of this is that it will legitimize the scientific discussion on this subject. You know, modern science allows us to use instruments that are very capable, such as telescopes, cameras, and in fact, we already built an observatory at Harvard University under the Galileo project, which is monitoring the sky 24/7 in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. It's doing much better job than any past reports on UAP. And in fact, we have more data than in all past reports already. And we are planning on making copies of this observatory, placing them in many locations. So the Galileo project is already doing that, but there is still a lot to be done in terms of bringing legitimacy to the scientific discussion on this subject. And I think we can clear it out. We can, by looking at the sky, monitoring it for a year or two, we'll have good enough statistics to figure out the nature of these objects. And we are also using satellite data, looking at the Earth from above, not just from below, and figuring out what these objects might be. And, you know, we are completely agnostic the way science is done. We already published 8 papers, just appeared in public last week. And the NASA panel is giving validation to this approach in the sense that, you know, there are objects that are clearly unusual, and we need to learn more about them. And the best way to do it is scientifically, not by having an opinion, sitting on a couch and saying, I think this is this or that, the way it was done for decades until now.
Do we expect that we're going to see anything, let's say, dramatic come out of today's hearing? Because as we mentioned, it's going to go on for about 4 hours, according to NASA.
Right. I don't think it will be dramatic because this study was focusing on looking at public data, not classified data. And so what it looked at is, you know, evidence that we already heard about. For example, the Nimitz incidents where the Navy noticed objects that are peculiar. And as a result, I think what their charter is to recommend to NASA whether this subject is worth further study. And as I said before, I think it will give legitimacy because some of the reports are intriguing. Of course, the most interesting reports are classified, and I haven't seen them. I think the NASA study did not see them. Maybe people high up in the NASA hierarchy, in particular Bill Nelson, who was a senator, was exposed to the classified data. And as a result, he and other people under him give legitimacy to this study. And I think the best approach would be to gather new data, the way the Galileo project is doing, because the sky is not classified. It's only the sensors that the government used to collect this data that are classified. And so I think we have a good chance of finding out what these things are, as long as we allow ourselves to be curious and to collect new data.
And this NASA panel, of course, coming as we know that there is that Pentagon-led investigation as well. Is there any correlation or connection between the two, or are they both separate?
Definitely, there is a connection because then while the NASA study looked at unclassified data, the Pentagon organization, which is called All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, is looking at classified reports. And the way they deal with them, according to the head of AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, is that they have two teams looking at past reports. One is led by intelligence experts, the second is led by scientists and engineers, and they vet what this data may imply. The problem with that approach is that it's past data, so it's limited to whatever you have, and you can't look farther into it. And moreover, it's anecdotal. It's all based on reports that were unexpected. And so instead, what we are doing as scientists in the Galileo project is a systematic study of the sky, where most of the time we see familiar objects, and every now and then we might see unusual objects. And this will give much better calibration as to what is the nature of this phenomena. And I think altogether, the more scientists are engaged, the better it is. Like any other scientific subject, we can get to the bottom of it.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question right now because I love to ask those. Why are people so interested in UFOs? In your opinion, when you hear about something like this, so many people grasp onto it and they want to know more. Why is that?
Well, a very simple reason. Two-thirds of the Americans believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, which makes a lot of sense because there are tens of billions of stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And moreover, a significant fraction of them have an Earth-sized planet at the same separation. So it makes sense. And this is, by the way, more than the fraction of Americans that believe in God, just so that you know. Moreover, there is a viral aspect to this subject, because if there is another civilization, it was most likely in existence billions of years before us, because that's the unit of time in the cosmic perspective. And it's therefore, if it arrived to us before we arrived to them, it's much more advanced than we are. So we can learn from it, and we can look at our future. And it's viral in the sense that maybe they're more intelligent than we are. So it touches the core of our existence. We tend to think that we are unique, special, privileged. But whenever you deal with superhuman abilities, it puts us at awe as to any phenomena like that. And of course, religion taps on that. The sense of God is related to a superhuman entity. And suppose it's real, suppose it's not what religious texts talk about as God, but it's actually a more advanced technological civilization that can create life artificially, and maybe even create baby universes artificially. That's an entity that previously we were at awe with respect to in religious texts. Now it will become part of science.
All right, Dr. Loeb, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. We appreciate it. A lot of great insight, and we know the meeting set to start here in just about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, as I mentioned, that meeting's set to begin in just about 5 minutes, so you can watch it live, raw, and unfiltered right here on Live Now from Fox, expected to go on again for about 4 hours. Let's head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, and on the other side, we'll get right back into your headlines and other live events. You're watching Live Now from Fox. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 1027 on the East Coast and 727 on the West Coast. Taking a live look there at the stock board where you can see the Dow is starting off the day there in the red. I do want to get to some of the other top stories that we are covering today. Take a look at your screen as jury selection is now underway for a former deputy set to go on trial for failing to confront the gunman involved in a deadly massacre at a Florida high school 5 years ago. Former Broward County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson remained outside of a building at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland as Nicholas Cruz carried out his attack, murdering 14 students and 3 staff members. I want to talk more about the trial and the case itself, so let's bring in Robert Jarvis, a law professor at Nova Southeastern University. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, is this the first time that we have seen a case of this nature where you have a former law enforcement officer being charged for not intervening and confronting a shooter?
Yes, absolutely. This is an unprecedented trial.
Of course. So obviously a lot of questions brought up here. Based on your legal experience, is there actually a case here? And what do prosecutors have to prove to actually convict Peterson in this case?
So I don't really think that the government is going to be successful. It has a very tough hill to climb. There are 11, there are 11 counts against Peterson. The first 7 counts are for felonious child neglect. It's going to be very difficult to prove that he was a caregiver, which is what the statute requires. There are 3 counts for culpable negligence. The prosecution would have to show that he was grossly negligent. I think that is a more reasonable thing to charge him with, but still I think it's a tough hill for the government to climb. And then there is a count involving perjury. That may be the easiest count for the government to prove, which is a little odd because because perjury is usually a difficult count to prove.
What is the significance of this case overall, and could the outcome itself have any kind of effect on whether other law enforcement officers are actually charged for failing to act in a situation like this one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's hyperbole to say that everyone across the country is watching this trial. Of course, in the Uvalde, Texas shooting at Robb Elementary last year, there's the same sort of claim that is being made that the cops who first responded waited until the Border Patrol SWAT team came in, and that allowed the shooter to keep doing what he was doing. So yes, there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern, frankly, on the part of police departments, police officers, if this case does in fact go against Peterson.
And so many people have heard about the situation there in Parkland. Of course, it has been about 5 years now. So how difficult can it be to seat a jury in a case like this when you're talking about such a high-profile situation that so many people are aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be very tough, to tell you the truth. We were able to sit a jury for Nicholas Cruz, the shooter. That was a much more high-profile case. So there's no question that it will take time to seat a jury. But we're only trying to seat 6 jurors and 4 alternates. So I don't think that will, at the end of the day, present any sort of insurmountable problem.
If he is found guilty, what kind of sentence here does Peterson possibly face? Because it sounds like it's a fairly lengthy sentence.
Yeah, I mean, the decision has to be unanimous by the jury. Then it'll be up to Judge Fine to decide what the punishment should be. Theoretically, if found guilty on all counts, and if Judge Fine were to sentence Peterson consecutively on all counts, Peterson could be looking at almost 96 years in prison. But given his age, there's just no way he's going to get that kind of sentence. I think he's probably looking more in the range of maybe 10 to 15 years at the most. But that, of course, assumes that the government wins convictions. And as I say, I think it's a very tough fight for the government.
All right, Robert Jarvis there, law professor at Nova Southeastern University. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and provide that insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me be here.
All right, everybody, so I do want to take you out to a live event that we do have going on right now. We've been talking a lot about this as we do now have this public meeting underway. This is all connected, of course, to UFOs and UAPs, commonly known as unidentified flying objects, the government referring to them as unidentified aerial phenomena. We do have a 4-hour meeting coming ahead of a report expected in the coming weeks. And of course, they're going to talk all about UFOs here. So that meeting, as I mentioned, is underway. Let's pop up the audio and listen in live, raw, and unfiltered.
And dedication. It's disheartening to note that several of them have been subjected to online abuse due to their decision to participate on this panel. And NASA's security team is actively addressing this issue. We at NASA are acutely aware of the considerable public interest in UAP. However, it's critical to understand that any form of harassment towards our panelists only serves to detract from the scientific process, which requires an environment of respect and openness. Now, every member of our team is a recognized authority in their respective field, and they have our unequivocal support. NASA stands in solidarity with them, advocating for a respectful discourse that befits their expertise and the significance of their work. Thanks. Now, in recent years, the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena, nowadays termed unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, has captured the attention of the public, the scientific community, and the government alike. And it's now our collective responsibility to investigate these occurrences with the rigorous scientific scrutiny that they deserve. NASA Administrator Senator Bill Nelson believes that understanding UAPs is vital for several reasons, which is why he directed this study. First and foremost, it provides an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of the world around us. As an organization dedicated to exploring the unknown, this work is in our DNA. Secondly, this study aims to enhance situational awareness. The presence of UAPs raises concerns about the safety of our skies, and it's this nation's obligation to determine whether these phenomena pose any potential risks to airspace safety. By understanding the nature of UAPs, we can ensure that our skies remain a safe space for all. In order to achieve these goals, it is crucial that we employ a scientific lens for our UAP work. It's precisely this rigorous, evidence-based approach that allows one to separate fact from fiction. This team is comprised of experts from various disciplines, which allows them to approach this work from multiple perspectives. And we have greatly benefited from that collective expertise. Now, why do we value a scientific approach? It's because science is built on evidence. It thrives on scrutiny. It demands reproducibility, and above all, objectivity. When we approach UAPs from a scientific perspective, we do not come in with an agenda. We come in needing a roadmap. Indeed, the primary objective of this incredible team of experts is not to go back and look at grainy footage of UAPs, but rather to give us a roadmap to guide us for future analysis. And this is the very scientific method that NASA holds true to its heart. Scientific research is intended to be publicly available and transparent,